Un buen día con todas y todos desde las diferentes
Good
partes del
morning,
mundo
everybody,
donde se
from the
encuentren.
different parts of the world
Estamos
where
ya
you are.
esperando que se
We
sigan
are
conectando en este momento.
waiting
Tenemos cada
for
vez más
everybody to
participantes
join this
y
webinar.
les
We
damos la más
have
cordial
many
bienvenida
participants,
a
and we
este
would like to
seminario
welcome
web
you
que
to this
tratará sobre la
webinar,
implementación
which will
de
be
la
about the
infraestructura de calidad.
implementation of
Se
quality
revisarán casos
infrastructure,
prácticos en
and
medio
we will
ambiente y
review practical
sostenibilidad,
cases about
emisiones
the
y una
environment,
economía circular,
sustainability, some lessons on
metodología,
circular economy,
acreditación y
metrology,
adquisiciones para un
accreditation,
impacto
and
tangible.
acquisitions for a
Es un gusto
tangible
contar
impact.
con su presencia
It's
en
a
este
pleasure to
espacio de
have
intercambio
in this
técnico,
space for
aprendizaje y
technical exchange,
reflexión
learning,
colectiva,
and
en el que
collective
reunimos
reflection, and where we
experiencias
gather
internacionales que
international
muestran cómo la
experiences that
infraestructura de la
show
calidad
how
puede
quality infrastructure
convertirse en una
can
herramienta concreta
become a
para
concrete
responder a los
tool for
desafíos
responding to the
ambientales,
challenges,
productivos
the
y
environmental
regulatorios de
challenges,
nuestro
productive
tiempo.
challenges, and regulatory challenges
Gracias
of our
por
times.
conectarse y ser parte
Thank
de
you
este
for
encuentro
joining this
impulsado en el
webinar and
marco del
being a
trabajo
part of
técnico
this
del IAAC
meeting
y
in
sus
the
espacios
context
de
of
cooperación.
IAAC's work
Hoy
and
se
its
abordarán
cooperation
temas como
spaces. Today,
economía
we will
circular,
talk about
metrología aplicada
circular
a la
economy,
protección radiológica, reconocimiento
metrology applied to
internacional de resultados
radiological
acreditados,
uh,
adquisiciones en cadenas de suministro
acquisitions in
críticas y
supply
aprendizajes
chains,
para fortalecer la
and lessons
infraestructura
learned
de
for
la calidad del
strengthening
futuro.
the quality infrastructure for the
Antes de
future.
iniciar,
Before
compartimos algunas
beginning, we
indicaciones
will
generales.
share some
Este
general
seminario web
instructions.
tendrá
This
traducción
webinar will have
simultánea para
simultaneous
español
interpretation for
e
English
inglés
and
que lo pueden
Spanish,
activar en el
and you can
menú
activate it
inferior
in the
de la
menu
aplicación de
of
Zoom.
the Zoom
Asimismo,
application.
podrán compartir sus
You will be
comentarios
able
o
to share your
enviar sus
comments or
consultas
send
a
your
través del
questions
módulo
through
habilitado para
the
preguntas y respuestas que
Q&A
también está en el menú
window,
inferior
which
de
is
esta
in
aplicación.
the toolbar of this application.
Este webinar
This webinar
será
will
grabado.
be recorded.
Se utilizarán
It
capturas
will
de pantalla
be
para promoción del evento y
screenshots will be
ustedes
used for
podrán
promoting the
acceder
event, and you will
a
be
la
able to
grabación del
access the
mismo a
recording
través del canal
through
oficial
the
de
official
YouTube
YouTube
de la
channel
Cooperación
of
Interamericana de
IAAC.
Acreditación.
Para dar inicio formal al
In
seminario,
order to
está con
begin
nosotros
with the
Andrea Melo,
seminar, we have
presidenta del
Andrea
IAAC,
Mello,
quien
Chair of
compartirá la palabra de
IAAC, who will
apertura.
share some
Adelante, Andrea.
introduction
Muchas
words.
gracias, Christine.
Thank you,
Hello, everyone.
Christine.
It's a pleasure receiving all of you in this memorable webinar. Distinguished colleagues, partners, and friends, good day and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. It's a privilege to open this webinar on practical cases of quality infrastructure implementation in the environment, sustainable development, and circular economy sectors. The IAC, the Inter-American Accreditation Corporation, strengthens regional quality infrastructure by supporting standardization, metrology, and accreditation across the Americas. As key partners in quality infrastructure efforts, we promote technical coherence, sustainable development, and mutual recognition of conformity assessment results that provide confidence and facilitate international trade. Today's topic sits at the heart of that mission. I thank our speakers and all of you for being part of this conversation. With that, I will hand the floor over to Veronica. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la presidenta de
I would like
IAAC
to
por
thank
sus
the
palabras de
chair
bienvenida y por
for
marcar la
her
importancia
welcome
de
words
este
and for
seminario.
contextualizing the
Son
importance
parte
of this
también
seminar.
de esta iniciativa el
It is a
equipo del
part of
Comité de Partes
this
Interesadas
initiative.
de
The team
IAAC
of the
y sus
stakeholders team is a part
representantes
of
darán
this
también un
activity,
mensaje
and its
introductorio.
representatives will give an
Doy
introduction
paso
message too.
primero a
I will give the
Israel
floor first
Teixeira, que
to
es
Israel
presidente de este
Teixeira, who
comité.
is the
Adelante, por
chair of
favor.
this committee. The floor is yours, Israel.
Gracias, Verónica. Gracias,
Thank you,
Presidente
Veronica. Thank
Andrea. Y
you,
buenos días a
Chair
todos.
Andrea, and good morning,
En
everybody.
nombre del Comité
And
de
on
Partes
behalf of
Interesadas
the
do
Stakeholders
IAC,
Committee of
me gustaría
IAC,
añadir algunas
I would like to
reflexiones para
add
complementar estas
some
palabras.
thoughts
La
to
infraestructura de
what has
calidad
been said. The
existe para
quality
servir a las
infrastructure
personas,
is for
a las
serving
indústrias
people,
que
for
dependen
serving
de ella
industries that
para acceder a los
depend on it, for
mercados,
accessing
a los
markets,
reguladores que dependen de ella
for
para proteger
regulators
el
that
público
depend on it,
y a los
for
ciudadanos
protecting
cuya
the
confianza en
public,
última
and
instancia rehace en
the
ella.
and it's based
Los
on
casos apresentados
trust. The
hoje
cases that will be presented today have been
precisamente
selected
con este propósito.
with this
Cada uno
purpose.
muestra
Each
la
one
infraestructura de la
shows the
calidad
quality
no como
infrastructure not as
marco abstracto,
an
sino
abstract
como algo que
framework,
marca
but as
una
something that
diferencia
marks a
tangible
tangible
en los
difference
sectores del
in
medio
the
ambiente, el
environmental
desarrollo
sectors,
sostenible y la
sustainable
economía circular.
development, and circular
A
economy.
través de nuestro grupo de
Through
trabajo
our
conjunto sobre
joint
infraestructura
work
de
group
calidad,
about
el
quality
Comité de
infrastructure,
Partes
the
Interessadas se
stakeholder committee
compromete a mantener
is
esta
committed to
perspectiva del
maintain
usuario
this perspective, this
como
user
eje central
perspective,
del trabajo
as a
de
central point
la IAC.
of IAAC's
Dicho,
work.
dicho esto, cedo la palabra
Uh,
a mi
having
colega
said this, I would like to
Verónica
give
para
the
que nos
floor
guíe
to
a
my
través del
colleague
programa de hoy.
Veronica so
Muchas
that she can
gracias.
guide us through today's program.
Muchas
Thank you
gracias,
very much.
Israel.
Thank
También
you,
como parte de este
Israel. And as a
comité
part of
damos
this
la bienvenida y
committee,
la palabra a
I would like to
Silvana
welcome and give the
Ricciarini, que
floor
también se
to
encuentra con
Silvana
nosotros hoy.
Ricciarini, who is here with us today.
Gracias, Verónica. Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much, Presidenta, President Andrea and Israel. Thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure. I'm Silvana Ricciarini, Principal of the Quality Excellence in Infrastructure Systems, known as IQUIS, and the coordinator of the IAAC Stakeholders Joint Working Group on Quality Infrastructure. This webinar is dedicated to practical cases of implementing quality infrastructure in two of the most pressing areas of our time, the environment and sustainable development, and increasingly central to both the transition to a circular economy. Now, what ties our program together is this: across very different areas, circular economy, nuclear energy, the global nuclear supply chain, environmental testing, energy efficiency, sustainable biofuels, the key quality infrastructure pillars, such as metrology, standards, accreditation, conformity assessment, are doing the same essential work. The interaction of these pillars creates trust. Basically, trust in the product and services and processes. Whether the outcome is a recycled material claim, a calibration record for a reactor vessel, as an example, or a biofuel sustainability certificate, its credibility rests on metrology standards, accreditation, and conformity assessment that can be trusted across borders. Now, today's program approaches this through 4 different lenses on the same question. How is quality infrastructure enabling sustainability and circularity in practice? Well, we begin at the global level with the Global Quality Infrastructure Index and the circular economy. Then we move on into the operational reality of National Metrology Institute, the global nuclear supply chain, and finally, a cross-sector US perspective on environmental testing, energy efficiency, and sustainable biofuels. After the presentations, we will have 30 minutes of moderated questions and answers that will bring all the threads together. I encourage you to bring questions from your own context. With that, I will hand the floor to Veronica, our Master of Ceremony. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Esas palabras introductorias y a
Thank you
continuación
for your
damos
introduction
paso al
words. And
desarrollo de la agenda
now we will
técnica.
continue with
Como
the
ya
technical
mencionó
agenda.
Silvana, cada
As Silvana
intervención tendrá
mentioned,
una
each
duración
intervention will
aproximada de 30
last
minutos
about
con
30
un
minutes
espacio de preguntas
with
y respuestas al final.
Q&A
Les invitamos
time
a
at the
quienes
end of
se
it.
conectaron recientemente
The persons who
a
just joined
activar
us, please
su módulo de
activate
traducción
your
simultánea en la parte
interpretation
inferior del
function
aplicativo
in
de Zoom
the
para inglés o
Zoom
español
toolbar
y
for English or
también
Spanish
tendrán
if
acceso
needed.
al módulo de
And
preguntas y
you will
respuestas
have
para que
access
puedan
also to
enviarnos
the
sus
Q&A
consultas.
window so that you can send your
Iniciamos.
questions. Let's begin.
Gracias, Verónica. Nuestro
Thank
primer
you, Veronica.
expositor es
Our
Christian
first
Sean
presenter is
Palmer de
Christian
Mesopartner.
Schoen
Su
Palmer from
presentación se
Mesopartner.
titula
His
Representación en
presentation is
infraestructura
called
de
From
calidad
Quality
al
Infrastructure
potencial
Performance
circular,
to Circular Potential,
explorando
exploring
GQ
CGQ
Segundo
to
2025, perspectivas
2025.
globales. Esta
global
intervención
perspectives.
abordará
This
cómo el
presentation,
2.2025 es una línea base de
it's
diagnóstico
a
para comprender la
baseline for
fortaleza de los sistemas
understanding and
nacionales de
strengthening the
infraestructura de la
national
actualidad
systems for
en su
quality
relación con
infrastructure
temas
and
emergentes
its
como la
relation with
economía
emerging
circular.
topics
Le
as
demos la palabra a
circular
Cristian.
economy. We'll give the
Bienvenido.
floor to Christian. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you very much. Good day and good evening. I'm presenting in English, and I'm actually presenting from Hanoi, Vietnam, so I'm a little bit farther away from all of you, or from most of you, I suppose, which of course makes me happy to still participate today. I will share now my presentation, and then we go through the slides. I doubt that I need 30 minutes, but or 25 minutes or so, but I think that's fine, even if it's a little bit faster. Okay, so as it has been announced, and as you can see here, I'm talking particularly about the Global Quality Infrastructure Index, the 2025 edition, and explore how QI performance can also shed light on circularity and the transition to a circular economy. How are these concepts and indices related, and what can we learn for the future? So the structure of the presentation starts with looking at the sustainability transition, which we are currently experiencing around the world. We're moving from linear models to sustainable models and finally to circular models of the economy. In how far quality infrastructure is relevant for that, needs to contribute in order to make that happen, make that possible. What the GQI diagnosis means for this process, what do we learn already from the current results of the performance diagnosis of national quality infrastructure systems for their future applications in areas like circular economy. So the core question is, how do current QI systems enable or limit the transition toward more sustainable and circular economic models? A question that I partly addressed, but that we can further then explore through discussion and questions and answers after the presentation. Looking at the sustainability transition, first to understand what we are talking about. So currently, most economic systems operate linear production and consumption. They focus on cost and volume and the end of pipe compliance. But it's moving now in some countries slower, in some other countries faster towards circular and sustainable models to run the economy, to life cycles performance of products, to resource efficiency and transparency of value chains and trusted sustainability claims. In order to make that happen, quality infrastructure is obviously needed, as you see here on the right side. There are certain requirements that need to be fulfilled, and QI can support this process. First of all, the measurement and the data are necessary. There are harmonized sustainability metrics required, life cycle-based measurement approaches, reliable data on emissions and resource flow, and also digital product and value chain information, like, for example, the digital product passport, which is already started to implement it by the European Union, but also increasingly by other countries, like, for example, China is also pushing this agenda. Secondly, trust and verification. Credible sustainability and circular claims of enterprises, for instance, verification of recycled and secondary materials, traceability and transparency across value chains, but also internationally recognized certification and accreditation. And thirdly, system coordination and interoperability. It is necessary to create alignment across QI institutions and regulations, but also across countries of national quality infrastructure systems in different countries through international interoperability. Agility for emerging technologies and business models is necessary to adjust to them in an agile and swift way, but also then, of course, in the inclusion of SMEs and resilient supply chains. All right, so the traditional roles of QI as we know it, and all of us, I suppose, are somehow working in quality infrastructure, either in specific pillars of the quality infrastructure, or we help analyzing and supporting and upgrading quality infrastructure systems. So traditionally, quality infrastructure ensures product quality and safety. It supports compliance with regulations, facilitate trade and market access. It also ensures accurate and traceable measurement through metrology, supporting testing, inspection, and certification as confirmed. Reduce technical barriers to trade and build confidence in conformity assessment results. We want to support industrial productivity and competitiveness in the end. This is what we are working on, either on some of these objectives or on all, but there are more now coming through the sustainability transition and the move towards circular economy. We also need, or QI needs to look at and contribute to life cycle performance assessment, to resource efficiency and circularity measurement, to traceability and transparency across value chains. Also the verification of sustainability and ESG claims, environmental, social, and governance claims, digital interoperability and product data systems, and also internationally harmonized sustainability frameworks and standards. So there's a new basket of tasks and objectives that QI also needs to support in order to move from linear to sustainable and further to a circular economic model. So obviously QI matters for sustainable and circular economic models through achieving sustainability ambitions, net zero and climate goals, high on the agenda of many countries, resource efficiency, circular economy, sustainable production and consumption, and also ESG and sustainability reporting. So QI enables here in each of these areas to define sustainability requirements through standardization, ensures accurate measurement of energy use and emissions. It's offering testing, certification, and verification, confirms the competence of conformity assessment bodies through accreditation, supports progress towards sustainable development goals, and also, as mentioned before, it's creating trust and international recognition across borders. So the sustainability transition, of course, it depends on innovation policy and entrepreneurship, but not only on those elements, it also increasingly depends on trusted systems for measurement, conformity assessment, and interoperability. And this is the community, our community comes into play here in order to support this important transition. So talking about circular economy, I added one slide here to make sure we are all on the same page talking about it, what we mean when we talk about circular economy. So it's an economic model that replaces the take, make, and waste linear system with one that keeps resources in use for longer. That means to ensure sustainability. The circular economy aims to eliminate waste and pollution by designing products for longevity, reuse, repair, and recycling, and at the same time regenerating natural systems. And this is achieved through practices that we all already practice in life. Some of these practices we use more than others, like, for example, sharing cars, sharing other assets through leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and also recycling existing materials and products. On the right side here, you see a graphic that is taken from an ISO presentation that was used during a training of the 59,000 family of standards, which cover the circular economy. So there is already a family of standards which is currently rolled out through trainings and dissemination worldwide. And this slide shows, this graphic shows the idea how a circular economy works. So you see waste is completely eliminated here. This is not realistic. There will always be some waste at the end which need to be disposed. But a lot of the material coming out of the linear process can be used again. It can be repaired. It can be refurbished, remanufactured. It can be also reduced and so forth. So there are a lot of ways in order to use it again or to, from the beginning, use it more efficiently. And of course, as you see on the left upper side, those products which later go into a reuse, refurbishing, recycling also need to be designed for that. So the process starts at actually the production or even earlier in the sourcing of the raw material. So QI methods for sustainable and circular economic models, we already understood that. There are certain needs of a circular economy and practices. I mentioned many of them already: reuse, recycle, circular product design. Also, the traceability of material. Where does it come from? How has it been processed and transformed through the process? We want to trust in circular claims, and we want to operate efficiently and also understand and improve the life cycle performance of products. QI contributes to all of that. It creates standards for all these different technical specifications: durability, repairability, and recyclability. It's necessary to test and verify material quality in order to assess whether it can be used again or for what kind of purpose it can be used. For the product design, we talk about eco-design and also performance standards that are applied. Measurement and digital information systems, again, the keyword digital product passport, which helps us to trace a product back to its origin and understand what has happened on the way to the consumer. Certification and accreditation is very important throughout the process. All the different steps, or many of the different steps, require certifications. And those certification bodies obviously need to be accredited to be proven competent. And in the end, we also need harmonized metrics and assessment methodologies. So the question is now, looking at all these new challenges and requirements, how ready are existing QI systems to support this evolving sustainability and circular economy agenda? So the GQI comes now into play here because it helps us to understand the performance of national quality infrastructure systems. Many of you might know this index. It has been produced 4 times so far, every 2 years. The latest edition is 2025. And it looks at 185 national economies and assesses their national quality infrastructure systems. I'm just having a few slides on that, but if you're more interested and you also want to see the whole list, the whole ranking of 185 countries and the assessment of their situation, then please go to the report, which you find on the website, which is indicated on this slide, and also on the last slide of the presentation with the QR code. So the GQI looks at basically the key pillars of a national quality infrastructure system, which is metrology, standardization, as well as accreditation and conformity assessment. And in each of these pillars, there are a couple of indicators that are used in order to assess the current situation. Very important information regarding the GQIs: it is only based on publicly available data. So there are no primary surveys or other data collection performed. It's only what is available publicly, mostly on the website of the different QI institutions of the countries. And then the data are collected, they are processed, and the index is produced on this biannual basis. So the GQI shifts the discussion from individual institutions, like for example the National Standards and National Metrology Institute, to the performance of the whole system. And here you see the ranking, the top 10 countries according to the GQI 2025. The overall index, where Germany, United States, China, United Kingdom, Italy rank first, followed by other countries. And you see also the sub-indices here. So you don't need to be number 1 in all sub-indices in order to perform best in the overall index. You see Germany is number 2 in all, but then number 1 in the overall index, because other countries like the United States with leads in metrology and accreditation has only the 9th rank in standardization, so it's moving to 2nd place, and so forth. So the key findings are that strong QI systems remain concentrated in advanced economies, which is not very surprising. Performance differs across QI pillars, which I just mentioned. Some emerging economies show rapid progress. For example, Vietnam has shown rapid progress, and also Saudi Arabia, a few countries, from the last to the current GQI result. QI performance correlates with competitiveness, imports, exports, and GDP. They are actually quite high correlations. These are not causalities, but actually correlations. So having a high QI also gives you a good chance to be good in importing and exporting of products and have a relatively high GDP. That does not necessarily mean that systems are equally prepared for future sustainability challenges, but it's certainly a good basis for developing then particular QI services for circular economy and sustainability. So the key GQI dimensions, standardization, metrology, accreditation, and conformity assessment, all are in principle supporting sustainability and circular economy ambitions. Standardization supports circularity, eco-design, and traceability. Metrology, the measuring of emissions, materials, and efficiency. Accreditation, the trust in sustainability claims. And conformity assessment, the verification of circular and green requirements through testing, inspection, and certification. So there's a lot of aspects, dimensions already covered by the GQII, the institutional capacity, the international recognition, the technical competence, also standards participation, so the participation in standards development, in national standards institutes, but then also in those which are operating globally, like ISO and IEC. There are only a few selected sustainability-related indicators in the GQII. In terms of accreditation and certification, for example, for ISO 14001 energy management systems and also ISO 50001. Emerging sustainability dimensions need to be covered in the future by indices like the GQI. That means circularity readiness, the life cycle approaches, the traceability systems, the digital product information, and the ESG sustainability verification. But we can already now look at the correlation between the GQI and those areas of readiness in circularity and sustainability. In order to do that, we look at the Global Green Economy Index, which is another index, a parallel index to the GQI, but it doesn't look at quality infrastructure. It looks at a variety of sustainability and circularity indicators and combines them to an overall index published by Dual Cities, also on a basis of every 2 to 3 years. The last one is from 2022, so let's say every 4 years. And the matrix here, you see the combination of different performances of the GQI and the GGEI. There are some countries which are strong in both, like, for example, Germany, Sweden, Australia, and the UK. Some countries which are strong in QI and less strong in green economy readiness, like China, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and India. I'll just pick a few examples. Of course, there are many more. And on the next slide, you see many more. But you can also visit this link here and look for the GGEI and look at the report. And also you can download the data in order to compare the countries. We have emerging developing QI systems, like, for example, in Iceland, Malta, and El Salvador, who have a high green economy readiness. So they're already performing very well on these sustainability and circularity indicators, but still need to further develop their QI system in order to catch up and support these ambitions better. And we have some countries which are low on both, like, for example, Nicaragua, Belize, Trinidad, Tobago. I collected here, I used some countries also from the region you are operating in. So this is now a graphic looking at the correlation between GQI on the x-axis here and the GGEI on the y-axis. And you see some correlation. You see this trend line which is increasing. In some countries which, as mentioned before, operate quite well on both, like Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, and so forth. Some operating are below the trend line. That means they are strong in quality infrastructure and less in green economy, like, for example, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, India. And on the left side, high in green economy, Iceland, Malta, El Salvador, but not so strong in quality infrastructure yet. So different correlations of QI strengths and sustainability orientation create diverse starting points for sustainability transition. So what actually to do? when you now find yourself in one of these areas and want to, for example, strengthen your quality infrastructure in order to better support sustainability agendas and circularity agendas. So there are different areas of intervention or different starting points for action. You can look at sustainability and circularity services, supporting QI supporting life cycle measurement, circularity verification, or also easy ESG conformity assessment. You can look at your digitalization process and creation of data systems like the digital product passport, interoperable sustainable data, and smart conformity assessment. It can be policy and system integration that you are particularly looking at, like alignment with the sustainability and industrial strategies, or innovation and global interoperability support for emerging green technologies, for instance, or trying to get better international recognition in green trade facilitation, for example, through international trade agreements. And finally, inclusive and resilient transition as an area of intervention, trying to create SME access to sustainability related QI services, for instance, of which not only the important to offer these kind of quality infrastructure services, but also to create access to those which maybe can't afford it at the beginning or don't even know about it. So QI promotion is also a very important area of quality infrastructure promotion. So in the end, in order to decide to make a decision where to intervene, how to strengthen QI with sustainability agendas, how to align it, there are a couple of strategic questions that policymakers and institutions should start asking. For instance, are current QI systems still primarily designed for linear economic models? Which sustainability demands are already being addressed well and which are not? Where do the largest capability gaps remain? How can QI better support circular and sustainability transitions? Are sustainability priorities reflected in national quality infrastructure strategies? Not only one national strategy, but also the sub-strategies, like, for example, the standardization strategy or the metrology strategy. How can QI systems remain agile amid rapid technological change? The challenge is not only strengthening QI systems, which we often do through our consulting work or work for international organizations like PTB or the World Bank to analyze QI systems and to strengthen them, but we should also make sure that they evolve in the right direction and support future ambitions. And these future ambitions are looking like those. So we're moving from a compliance-driven system to a more sustainably oriented system, from product compliance to lifecycle performance, from linear production focus to circular value chains, from virgin material orientation to secondary material integration, isolated QI functions to integrated system approaches, from limited product information to transparent lifecycle data, and from reactive adaptation to strategic sustainability orientation. All right, so I already arrived at the conclusion slide. Looking at GQI as a compass for future-ready quality infrastructure. The transition toward more sustainable and circular economic models raises new questions about the future role of QI systems. Viewing GQI 2025 results through a sustainability lens helps explore how well systems may be positioned to support emerging demands. The GQI is not only a benchmarking tool, it helps reveal whether existing QI systems are fit for future sustainability demands, and it should also be used for that. The challenge is not only to strengthen QI systems, but to understand whether they are evolving in the right direction. Rather than providing a fixed roadmap, this perspective reflects on how QI systems can evolve in their support for sustainability, circularity, digitalization, green innovation, and resilience. So the challenges of our time. And tracking the evolvement of QI systems requires data. Global and regional QI organizations such as the IAAC could publish that kind of data and make them easily available. So it's very important that international QI alliances and associations like IAAC are actually actively involved in this data collection and sharing. Okay, thank you for your attention. The QR code here gives you access to the GQI website, but you can also see the website below here in these web links that you can visit. And we also have a blog, QI4D blog, where we
Muchísimas
regularly
gracias.
publish such information and consideration. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias
Thank
a
you
Christian
very
Schoen
much,
y su
Christian
intervención nos
Schoen,
dejó
for
una
your
idea
presentation.
central.
You
La
gave us a key
economía
idea.
circular necesita
Circular
confianza
economy
técnica,
requires technical
medición,
trust,
normas,
vision,
evaluaciones de conformidad
standardization,
y
conformity
sistemas capaces de
assessment, and
demostrar
systems capable
resultados
of
confiables.
showing reliable results.
Continuamos. Y
Carrying
ahora con
on
una experiencia
with
que
the
nos lleva al
experience that will
campo de
lead
la
us
metrología,
to
un ámbito en el que
metrology,
la
a
confiabilidad de
sphere
las
where
mediciones tiene un
reliability of
impacto directo
measurements
en la
has a direct
seguridad,
impact
la
in
salud, el
security,
ambiente
health,
y la capacidad técnica
environment,
de los
and the
países.
technical capabilities
Nuestra
of
segunda
countries. Our
expositora
second
es María
presenter
del
is Maria del
Rosario
Rosario
González
González
Márquez,
Marquez.
directora
She's the
general
general
del Instituto
director
Nacional
of
de
the
Metrología
National
de
Institute for
Colombia.
Metrology in Colombia.
Su presentación se titula
Her
La
presentation is
infraestructura
called
de la
Quality
calidad y la
Infrastructure and
metrología al
Metrology
servicio
at
de
the
la protección
service of
radiológica
the
para
radiological
garantizar
protection to
resultados confiables.
guarantee reliable
Esta intervención
results.
presentará
This
una
presentation
experiencia
will share an
interinstitucional del Instituto
interinstitutional
Nacional de
experience
Metrología
of
de
the
Colombia
NMI in
relacionada
Colombia
con el
related
fortalecimiento
to
de la protección
strengthening
radiológica y la
the
metrología de
radiological protection
radiaciones
in radiation
ionizantes,
metrology,
mostrando cómo la infraestructura
showing
de la calidad
how quality
puede
infrastructure
respaldar
can
decisiones públicas
support
y
public
técnicas
and
en
technical
sectores
decisions
altamente
in highly
especializados.
specialized
Adelante,
sectors.
por favor.
You have the floor.
Verónica, muchas
Veronica,
gracias
thank
y un
you very
especial
much,
saludo
and
al
a warm
Comité de
greeting
Partes
to the
Interesadas de
stakeholders
IAC, a
committee
los
from
colegas de
IAC
la
and
Secretaría,
colleagues from the
a nuestra
Secretariat,
presidenta
to our
que todo el
chair.
tiempo está
She is
apoyando esta
always
integración de la
supporting this
infraestructura de la calidad
integration
en
of
todos los temas de
quality
calidad. Gracias
infrastructure.
por este
Thank
espacio
you
y
for
yo
this
arrancaría
space,
con
and I
una
will kick
reflexión
off
para
with a
los más de
reflection
350
for the more
personas
than
que están
350
acudiendo a
people
este
who are
espacio.
participating
Y
in this
es
space.
cuántas
And it's
veces
how often
nosotros
do
cuando nos
we,
quebramos un
when
hueso
we
o
break
cuando
our
necesitamos
bones
hacernos
or
un
when we
chequeo por
need
un
to do a
riesgo
checkup for XY reason,
de cáncer, nos estamos
we
preguntando,
are wondering,
¿será que el equipo que se está
does the
usando tiene
equipment
las
being used
condiciones de
has
trazabilidad
the
meteorológica
traceability
adecuadas
conditions
para
that are
dar
the
resultados
appropriate one
confiables para
to
nuestro
provide
diagnóstico?
reliable
Bueno,
outcomes in
uno
our
nunca se lo
diagnosis? Well,
pregunta
you
realmente.
never
En
really
la
ask
búsqueda y
yourself
en la
that because
confianza
you're
de que
too
eso esté
concerned
sucediendo
and
de
you
manera
does trust
apropiada.
that that is
¿Y por qué
happening
pongo
properly. And
esta
why do
situación?
I share
Porque
this with you? It's
realmente
because
el
honestly,
desarrollo
the
de la
development,
confianza que
the
es el
trust
servicio que
that is
nosotros
in the
vendemos
service that
o
we
que las
sell
entidades
or that
públicas
public
como el Instituto
bodies
Nacional
such
de
as the
Metrología ofrece en
NMIs
su función
offer
pública
in its
tiene esa
public office,
responsabilidad.
they have
Nosotros
this
estamos
responsibility.
en un
We
mercadeo de
are
la
in
confianza y hoy vamos a
marketing
hablar
trust. And
de
today we're going
cómo
to
esa
talk about
confianza,
how that
primero,
trust,
tiene
first of
base
all,
científica
has a
y
scientific
segundo,
basis. And
genera
second,
esa
it
permanente
generates this
necesidad de fortalecer
ongoing
las
need to
capacidades y las
strengthen
competencias, que era
competences
un
and
poco lo que
capabilities and
Cristian ahora
capacities,
nos
which is a
estaba
little bit about
contando
what Christian
en
was
este
sharing
índice
with
global
us with
general.
this
Bueno, pues
global
en esas
index. So,
condiciones
under
vamos a
those
hablar de
conditions, we're going
cómo
to talk about
en Colombia
how in
hemos tenido
Colombia
una
we have
experiencia muy
had a
interesante
very interesting
de
experience
fortalecer
of
estas
strengthening
capacidades de
these
protección radiológica en
radiological
radiaciones
protection
ionizantes.
capacities in
Antes de
ionized
esto,
radiation. So, before we
digamos,
begin,
contarles un
I wish to
poco
share a
qué
little
hacen
bit
los
more
institutos
about
nacionales de
what the
metrología, poniendo como
NMIs
ejemplo
do,
el
giving you the
Instituto de
example
Metrología
of the
de
Colombian
Colombia.
NMI.
Aquí, para
So
quienes no son
here, for
colombianos,
those who
tienen
are
una
not Colombians,
fotografía,
you have
además
an
muy
image,
hermosa,
a
de la
very
bahía
beautiful
de
photograph
Cartagena,
of the Cartagena
icono
Bay,
del país de la
the
belleza y
icon
aprovecho
of
esta
a country of
propaganda para
beauty.
esperarlos
And this
acá.
is an ad
Miren
for you
ustedes
to visit
que
us.
el
Now look,
instituto tiene tres
the institute
características.
has three shirts, three jerseys. One, of course, we are part of the government of Colombia, of the Ministry of Science, and then we also belong to the system of science and technology and innovation through the Ministry of Science. And here we have something quite important, is that we're not necessarily, as scientific metrology is the one who's in charge of safeguarding the national patterns or the instruments, and there are in our system. And actually, this is the advantage, is within us. And we have the pleasure to belong to the quality infrastructure of Colombia as one of the strategic pillars. So we have these services for the NMI, and I wish to share it with you in this presentation because as of that development of services, we always look for integration opportunities. In addition to having this calibration service for the measurement equipments with national standards that we guard in the institute, we also have the possibility to offer essays, to produce reference material, and to generate technical assistance in metrology based on the knowledge that we experts acquire in international fora and training for comparison for those who have greater knowledge. In addition, as some of my colleagues from the Institute know, we contribute to the legal time and to national sovereignty, and we contribute to the UTC. And this, therefore, leads us to always be in training to strengthen our competences. Here, the pyramid of trust that I know that it's the one that we have in accreditation. This one corresponds to metrological traceability. You can look here on the bases, labs for calibration tests that provide services to the industry, several of which are also included in the universities. And then we have the labs that are accredited by the national accreditation bodies. In the case of Colombia, we provide services and metrological traceability monitoring because they've been able to prove their capability, and we grant them these traceability services. So the important thing here is that we are concerned about strengthening the metrological market. And thus, we have the first message here. The NMIs are interested in having the conformity assessment networks because the calibration and test labs do conformity assessment, and we want them to do them ever more better, not with less uncertainty, but we want to have the necessary certainty for the purpose that we have here. In Colombia is has signed the Metro Convention of 100 plus years, and with that, we are in the weights and measure forum showing permanently the capacity that we have to be tracing the international unit system. You can see here the capabilities that we have available and that are available. They go through physical metrology all the way to chemical and biology metrology. So this is just a reminder of the metrological community all over the world. It's very similar to what we see in the other ones divided by region. We have 6 regions according to the geographical locations. For Latin America is the SIM. See, we belong to that. We have 33 who belong to that under this context of metrology as a public asset. Now, in Colombia, we have these calibration and measurement capacities and capabilities that come from permanent key calibration measurements, as Christian mentioned, as those capabilities of measurement and calibration, which are part of the comparison variable in the quality infrastructure indexes. So here, for colleagues from the conformity assessment who are participating, you can see, okay, what is this useful for the country? So here, I have 2 numbers that might be of interest. One is that in the case of Colombia, but we see that in other institutes, we have 121 capabilities that are international recognized in the meteorological hierarchy for weights and measure bureau. It means that other peer assessors have come to assess us, evaluate us, that what we have declared as capabilities are actually proven. And also, as you can see up on the street to the right, 233 measurement calibration capacities that have gone through this technical journey that is comparable and that could show that we can provide that meteorological traceability to our calibration and test labs at different dimensions. Some could go to the international recognition, and others can be used by the value chains or the industrial chains according to their service needs and to the market capacities that are required. So all of these certainly connected to the unit system, international unit system. Here I'm going to talk about a case. This is a very interesting project that we're working on in Colombia together with the International Body for Energy. So how does the story begin? Our Ministry of Energy sends a call within the national project framework.
Mil disculpas la interrupción. Mil disculpas la interrupción. Tenemos
So
algunos
Rosario, sorry
mensajes de
to
que no
apologize.
estamos viendo
For some
la
reason, some
presentación.
people cannot see
Por
the
favor, ¿nos podría
presentation. Could you
ayudar
please help us
saliendo de su
by
presentación,
exiting your
volviendo a
presentation and
ingresar
going back in,
o
please?
colocarla en modo
Or
presentación?
setting it up in presentation mode so we can actually see it. Yes, of course.
Gracias.
Yes.
Por favor, déjame saber en el momento en que la estemos viendo. Cuéntame, ¿ya la están viendo?
Sí, ahora en la parte
You can see
inferior.
it, but can you
Sí,
please?
mírala.
Oh, there we
Ahí.
go.
¿Está bien?
Si nos confirman. Sí, nos están
Great.
confirmando positivamente.
We can
Continúe,
see
por favor,
it.
Rosario,
Please
mil disculpas.
continue, and my
No,
apologies.
gracias por
No,
avisarme.
yes, thank you for notifying me.
Bueno, espero que
Okay,
hayan
so I
visto
hope
las
you've been able to
anteriores,
see the
las voy a
previous
pasar
slides.
rápidamente, los
I will move
servicios,
through them quickly.
el
Services,
triángulo
you
de la
know,
confianza
the
meteorológica,
meteorological
las
reliability
capacidades que tenemos en
pyramid, the
Colombia,
capacities that we
el
have in
cruising
Colombia,
regional
the
y las
regional
cifras que les
distribution, the
estaba
numbers that I was
diciendo.
recently
Y vamos a
sharing with
empezar
you, and we're
entonces
going
en
to
el caso
thus
del
begin
proyecto.
with the case of our
Les estaba
project here.
contando
I was
pues
sharing then
hay un proyecto
that there is a
nacional al
national
cual
project
invita el
that
Ministerio de
that is
Energía,
invited by the Ministry of
donde
Energy.
estaba
So
dentro
they
de su
launch a
rol
call.
de
So
enlace
within
con el
their
Organismo
role of liaison
Internacional
with
de
the
Energía Atómica,
International Atomic Energy
invita a
Body,
presentar
they invite
soluciones o
to
proyectos que
submit
permitan
proposal
solucionar problemas.
solutions that
En el caso
allow
que nos
to
ocupa,
have
estaban
more
haciendo un
solutions. So
llamado
that
para que a
they were
partir
issuing
de
a
la
call.
seguridad y
So
protección
as of the
radiológica se
radiological
pudiera
security and
plantear la necesidad de
safety, we
fortalecer la
can
capacidad
propose
nacional y
strengthening the national
regulatoria
capacity and
para
regulatory capacity
atender
at national level to
derechos y
address
asegurar la calidad de
rights
servicios
and to ensure
nucleares en emergencias
nuclear and
radiológicas,
technical
que también
techniques
solucionara de
and to
alguna manera la
solve to a
salud
certain
humana.
extent the health.
Entonces, tengo que confesarles
So I
que
must
no sé cómo están en
confess
sus
that
países,
I
pero
don't
en
know how
Colombia
you are in your
aún hay
countries, but in
resistencia
Colombia,
en el
we still have some
entendimiento del
resistance
uso
in
de la
the
energía
understanding
nuclear.
on how to use nuclear
Creo que
energy.
hace parte
I believe that
de
that is
esta
part
pedagogía
of
permanente
that
de
permanent
entender cómo
education to help
aprovechar la
understand
energía
how we can
acumulada en
make
los
the
campos
most of
para
atomic
tener un manejo
energy to have
adecuado
a
y poder
proper
pues solucionar
management and
problemas
thus
con determinados
solve
sectores o
specific
cadenas de valor.
problems in
En
special
consecuencia, nos
sectors
arriesgamos a
or
levantar la mano y
chains.
decir,
So
ok,
we
¿por
raised
qué no
our hands and said,
pensamos
why
que la
don't we
infraestructura de la
think that
calidad puede
quality infrastructure
organizarse
can
para
organize
hacer
itself
un
so
proyecto
it
que
could develop
permita
a project
aprovechar
that
las
enables
capacidades
us
y
to
competencias que ya tenemos,
harness the
pero
capacities that we
adicionalmente
already
para
have,
poder
and in addition to that, to
fortalecernos?
be able to
Entonces,
strengthen
pues
ourselves
ya
further.
teníamos
So we
una base,
already
un
had a
programa de
basis,
entendimiento del gobierno
understanding
con el
program,
organismo.
a memo of
Adicionalmente,
understanding with the
encontramos
program, and then we
fácilmente que el
found
Objetivo
easily
3 de
the
Desarrollo
objective
Sostenible nos
3 of
permitía
the
movernos
SDG allowed us to move through a solution that can contribute to the healthy life and to promote well-being. And in the case of Colombia, we have a public policy that led us to present an improvement in technical capacities of our labs. And I'm saying that it's not just from the institution, but like I said at the beginning, of the network for secondary calibration even, who could also have these necessary efforts to be supported and validated and to be sustainable. So with that, the Colombian Institute in charge of showing nuclear energy, I must say that this institute does not belong to it belongs to the energy sector, but we are public research institutes and we join capacities to be able to participate in the solution, and it's essential. That's my first message. National articulation of bodies for a specific goal, and then to go and look for it in international cooperation. So what is it that we needed to do? Well, they have the capacities for metrological traceability, to have dosimetry, like I said, from detecting breast cancer all the way to be able to have a proper diagnosis of your bone conditions. And they will give you the traceability for Colombia, but they needed to bring their equipments abroad. So this necessarily shows that there's a lot of delays, costs downstream in the entire value chain that start to transfer to the conformity assessment bodies that have to go to these labs. But at the end of the day, the user pays it as well. And let's say that this started to generate delays, difficulties within Colombia. Therefore, our strategic objectives were under the framework of making the most of the capacities that we have in the National Metrology Institute, strengthen the necessary system to do the calibration for these electrometers. In addition to that, to make sure that this traceability exercise is monitored by the international system and to have luxurious results that are reliable. Remember, at first I said, how do we know whether the amount of energy that is being radiating to my body works to intervene in a disease or have a diagnosis? We as patients ask that. And then how employees and health professionals are exposed to that. And that's why the state intervened through a resolution where it stated, okay, we will take care of our health professionals that are permanently exposed to this radiation. And thus that led for the state itself to start to move the quality infrastructure and say, how are we going to solve this issue? And we want that written in a standard, but going down, how do we make sure that we assure that? And that's why we have this project of OIEA. And here, the message is very important, is that you, conformity assessors, you're constantly in the radar of this type of efforts. Why? Because at the end of the day, we won't really do anything if we don't make sure that quality calibration labs with the capacity of having this calibration of these electrometers can also start to prepare themselves to be ready for rendering this service. And what does this mean? It means that they should prepare themselves to get their accredited scope. And with that, we can start to really disseminate metrological traceabilities. Okay, so this is a little bit about what I was telling you about what happens around cancer. But we will see how these strengthened capabilities can have great use and great end use. The radioactive capacity leads the dose is received by a person to be the appropriate one. And this effective dose is the one that leads us to contract the cancer or either generate cancer. So the alarming situation is a WHS in 2020 is determined that there are more than 10 million deaths of cancer just in Latin America, 750,000. And really, this leads us for this type of preventions in time, these numbers to be reduced because of these efforts. So here we have something quite interesting as well, and I mentioned it at the beginning, and it's how the use of nuclear energies are effectively at the service of solving problems. Look, I have this image here for health, but behind this, we have these devices that you see here. They're different, but these are dose meters. So these small devices that you see up on the screen are the ones that need to operate properly. And how can they operate properly? To have the meteorological traceability that's the appropriate one, to make sure that those results are reliable and the health professional is taken care of and we have good results. Now, if we need to send them outside the country all the time, then we face another large problem that we have in quality infrastructure and the famous technological sovereignty. We need to be thinking that through these international cooperation opportunities that have a price and not all countries have the required investment to solve this sovereignty, we can reach it through this type of efforts that start with this. How can we strengthen the institute to be able to have the meteorological traceability for these devices? So these were the problems that we had to solve from a very large problem, how we should start, and that's a little bit about what I shared earlier. And this generates also some reflections regarding the measurement methods that we must strengthen, but also how those measurement methods need to be managed through knowledge for our value groups, which is conformity assessment in the case of calibration labs. So what is the impact for quality infrastructure? So in the case of Colombia, there is no nuclear law. And right now, we are with the legislation branch promoting a law that seeks to use nuclear energy to fight against cancer in Colombia. So look at this very interesting element is how quality infrastructure agents are preparing ourselves with international cooperation support. Even without a law, this allows us even to think that if we do have a law, this will grant us the capacity to have interesting movement here. So quality infrastructure can truly be a support and a tool to solve problems. So we try to have at least the experience, little if you will, in organizing ourselves and solving the purposes behind these law. So what have we been done thus far to see the big image, the landscape, not just for traceability, but also for accreditation? What were the calibration labs that could, because of their scope, have broader scopes even that could solve these issues? We were also looking for those who were the technical bodies within the Ministry of Energy who could also have this interest. And together with a platform, we identified the agents. They did radiotherapy within the Ministry of Health. So this map tells us there are very few for the demand and also very concentrated in main cities. However, this does allow us to start building along with them so they can prepare themselves technically to be able to have these additional scopes. Now, our participation, therefore, in the project is under contributing with other state bodies to push these developments, to be able to strengthen our meteorological traceability capacities, not just with equipment. We will receive equipment that will go into the electric magnitude systems, but we will also learn from measurement methods, and we are going to generate guidelines and working groups with stakeholders so they can learn. So the knowledge is not just centralized in the institute, but it to be shared. So in the future, we can have these radiological measurement capabilities for other sectors, and certainly to activate other mechanisms that we know within conformity assessment, such as the aptitude tests. These suppliers are essential for developing quality in all sectors, and not just to get the accreditation of our national accreditation bodies. The lab, and it's time, try to understand this supply and demand needs that we have to prove the capabilities and competence that we have for that, and how we could improve even more because of the result of that comparison. And to do that, and it's very interesting for this purpose. Now, let's say what are the lessons learned thus far from this exercise? First of all, planning. We always think that everything will be perfect and it flowed and all the stakeholder matrices and all the interested parties. This is always changing. And based on our experiences that
all the time to validate if we are all there, all the peoples that need to, all the persons that need to be there. And this is fundamental for the process. In the second place, how we can, with this example, look for more investment. The quality costs money, but that doesn't mean it's not a necessary investment. And when we speak about it being costly, it's our obligation to make it available of persons who don't use it or have doubts, and going beyond a statement. So thinking about planning is at the macro level works very well, because the more investment, the more sustainability that we have in time. Also, think about governance to know who is going to be involved through their role as authorities. Also, acknowledge the cooperation is very important in the case of metrology in this exercise. And the INTIUM for Argentina has helped us articulate and accelerate knowledge management that has to do with metrological traceability. And of course, validating all the time the interest of the counterparts according to their specific concerns is key for this project. The next steps are to finish strengthening ourselves as an institution with these examples, to put these examples in the region, also disseminating this experience to other activities, as I said, also generate guides through experience in these exercises of calibration and results, and also prove or show our decision makers that including this in the public agenda is important. As I said, there were some resolutions that tried to do this, but we don't have a law yet. And these developments have incentivated to have the context that are necessary for stating the importance of this work. With this, I would like to thank you, and I would like to close with a message. Why are we talking about health when we were invited to talk about circular economy and sustainability? Investing in the capability of traceability of radiological instruments gives us a technical capability that is early for mitigating risks, identifying in time the radioactive contaminants in the air, water, and soil. And this allows us to work a lot easier in matters of a technical sovereignty that will solve matters, including issues with agriculture. We know that the use of nuclear energies have been, in terms of conservation of foods, pest control, and also genetic improvement for food sovereignty. And in the case of the countries for the Americas, that we have a tradition of producing foods. This is fundamental. And if the conformity assessment evaluators can do it, I would like to thank you for that too.
Muchísimas gracias
Thank you,
a María del Rosario
Maria del
González
Rosario
por
González,
compartir esta
for
experiencia con
sharing with
todo el
us
técnico
this
de
experience of
cibertecnología.
very high
Fortalece la
value.
seguridad y la
It strengthens the
confiabilidad de resultados en
security, the
áreas
trust in
críticas para
results in
países.
critical areas for countries.
En el caso de María del
In the
Rosario,
case of Maria
vamos
del
a revisar si
Rosario,
tenemos
we
preguntas del
will
público debido a que
review
por
if
motivos de
we
agenda
will
no nos
see
va a
if we
poder
have
acompañar
questions
hasta el
from
final.
the audience because she won't be
Y
able to be at the
revisarle,
end because she has a tight agenda
recordarles
today.
también a todos los
So
participantes
I
que
would
está
like to
abierto el
remember
módulo de
the
preguntas y
participants
respuestas
that
para que
the
vayan
Q&A module
enviando
is open
sus
so that you can
consultas a
send your
través de este
questions or
espacio para
comments to
al
this
final
space
poder
so that at
darles
the
lectura.
end we can
María del Rosario
read
tiene
them
una
and answer them.
pregunta.
Maria del
Durante
Rosario,
su
we have a question. According
exposición,
to your
¿nos podría dar un
presentation,
resumen
could
corto de
you
qué ventajas directas
summarize
y
the direct
representativas tiene
advantages
la
and
evaluación de
representative advantages
conformidad
as conformity assessment in these
técnicos que se derivan de
technical
la cooperación
developments that
internacional?
come from the international cooperation?
Verónica, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Veronica.
Permíteme enumerarlas rápidamente.
Let
Primero,
me tell you
la
quickly.
evaluación de la
First,
conformidad
conformity
la
assessment
hacen los laboratorios.
is done
Cuando
by
analizan, entonces,
laboratories to
estar en el
evaluate conformity.
desarrollo
So being in
de
the
este tipo de
development
capacidades nos
of
permite,
this
desde
type
la
of
evaluación de la
capability allows
conformidad,
us from
atender
conformity
mejor
assessment
los grupos
to
de valor, los desafíos industriales
work better
específicos que
with
están en la
the
evaluación de la
clients
conformidad.
and the industrial
Pero también
groups
vamos
and
a ver
the
ya
parts that are
que siempre
related. But
tengo en estas
another
conversaciones
thought that I always
con
have
los
in these
colegas de los
conversations with
OEC
the
y es
colleagues from the
que
OECs,
también compran
it's
servicios de
or the
trazabilidad
CUBs, they
meteorológica,
also
¿sí?
purchase
Los
services
organismos de
of
inspección,
meteorological
los
traceability and
organismos de
inspection
certificación de
bodies,
producto
certification
confían
bodies.
en que
They
dentro de la
trust that
norma alguien se
within
puso
the
con
standard,
demostrar el cumplimiento de
somebody
las condiciones de
proves
trazabilidad
the
meteorológica.
compliance of
Y eso hace
meteorological
necesariamente que
traceability.
nos
And
preocupemos
this
por hacer el
makes us
conocimiento común. Ah, pues si vamos a comprarlo, ¿cómo lo podemos comprar? ¿Cómo
strengthen
podemos
the systems
identificar?
that
Por eso
work
son
with this.
importantes.
So that's why they're
Segundo,
important.
en
In the
este
second
sistema,
place, in
dentro
this
de estos
system,
esfuerzos que
in
hace el
these
Organismo
efforts that
Internacional
are
de
done by
Energía
the
Internacional
Atomic
para lograr
International
ser
Body and
sosteniblemente.
cooperants, it
Y
has
la
to be
última
sustainable in time.
es
And
ser
the only
sostenible,
way of
es
making it
involucrar en la
sustainable
cadena
is
los otros,
getting
todos
it
los
involved
pilares de la
in
infraestructura
getting
de calidad,
involved
pero
in the
también a
chain,
nuestros
the pillars
grupos
of
de
the quality
interés y en la
infrastructure, but
ciberseguridad
also the
hablamos grupos de
stakeholders
valor.
and also
Fortalecer la
value groups,
competencia de los OS, que
strengthen
es los
the competition
estándares
of
de
the
servicio,
CABs.
pues resulta ser
And this
súper importante.
is
Entonces,
very, very important.
cuando hacemos esta
So
promesa
when we
de
make this
que la
promise of
infraestructura de la calidad o la calidad es un bien
the quality
público,
infrastructure is
involucrarlo
public
en la
good,
representatividad de los
we
OS
need
es
to
fundamental.
represent the
Con esto mi
different
mensaje es
uh,
todos los temas de
cabs.
calidad
With
no
this
son
message, all
excluyentes de
topics
un
of
u otro
quality
pilar. Ah,
don't
esto es solamente
exclude
la
one pillar or
acreditación, esto es
another. This
solamente
is
la
not only
certificación,
accreditation or this is
aquello, tal.
only
Eso es
technical
imposible.
reference.
Ni
That's
tampoco
impossible. They're all interrelated.
podemos pensar que el
And we
hecho de
cannot
hablar
think
de
that
metrología no
talking
estamos
about
siendo
metrology,
representando, no estamos
when we're
representando
talking
los
about
organismos
metrology,
evaluadores de la
we
conformidad, todo lo
represent
contrario.
the conformity assessment
Reflexionar sobre
evaluators.
esta cadena de
So we
valor de
need
la calidad
to
resulta
reflect
ser
on this
importante.
value
Ahí
chain
está
for
el
quality.
impacto.
It's important. The
Ahora me
impact
estoy
is there.
imaginando si alguno de
Now
ustedes
I'm
está
thinking if
interesado en evaluar el
any of
alcance
you is
ambientado
interested
para dimensiones
in a
ambientales
scope
que
for
después tengan una
environmental
matriz que se pueda
measurements, and then you have
condicionar a
a matrix that
mediciones
could be conditioned to
radiactivas en el suelo, por
radioactive
ejemplo,
measurements in the
por
soil,
alguna
for
actividad.
example,
Eso es ya,
because
eso
of an
está pasando
activity.
en este momento.
And that's
Eso no
happening right
solamente
now.
se quedó en Chernobyl hace mucho tiempo, no. El
That didn't stay
aprovechamiento de
in
la energía
Chernobyl.
centrada en los átomos va a
The
solucionar problemas incluso en menores
energy
emisiones de
stored in atoms
CO2
will solve
en el aire.
many problems, including
Prepararnos para esa
CO2
realidad
emissions. So
pasa
let's
sin
get
lugar a
prepared
dudas
for
por
that
fortalecer
reality.
la educación que sobre ello, me
We
parece
need to
con base en
strengthen the
hechos científica
education about
precisamente,
this with
tenga los
scientific
organismos evaluadores de la
basis.
conformidad.
Muy bien, muchas gracias por la
Very
respuesta
well.
a esta
Thank you
pregunta.
for the
Recordarles
answer to
también
that
que si
question. I would
tienen
like to
preguntas más
remind you that
adelante,
if we have
como es
questions
habitual
later,
en nuestros
as we
eventos,
normally do in our events,
nosotros como equipo
we, as a
de
team,
comunicación, hacemos
communications team,
seguimiento y les damos la
we
respuesta
follow up on
posterior
these
a
questions
quienes
and
las respondemos. Por eso es que
we provide
pedimos
the
también
answers
que
to the persons that made the
coloquen su
question.
correo
So
electrónico
please include
si
your
es necesario
email.
para nosotros poderle
It
enviar a través de
because it's necessary for us to be able to send you the answers of our presenters. Thank you, Maria del Rosario, for your presentation, and let's continue.
Muchas gracias. Nuestro tercer
Thank you.
expositor
Our
es
third
Earl
presenter
Mayhem, presidente de las
is
operaciones de
Earl Mayhem.
autorrequisiciones nucleares
He
de Estados
works in
Unidos.
nuclear
Su
acquisitions from the
presentación se
United
titula
States,
Logrando el
and his
reconocimiento
presentation is
por
achieving
parte de la
NRC recognition of
NRC
IAAC
del
MRA
acuerdo
for ISO
ILAC-MRA para
IEC
laboratorios acreditados de calibración y
17025-2017 for
ensayos
accredited
bajo
calibration and
ISO
testing laboratories and the global nuclear supply chain.
17025-2017 en la cadena de suministro nuclear global. Esta presentación
This
abordará un caso de
presentation
gran relevancia para la
will talk
infraestructura
about
de
a
la
case
calidad.
of great
El
relevance for
proceso
quality
mediante el cual la
infrastructure, the
infraestructura
process
nuclear comercial de Estados
through
Unidos
which
buscó el reconocimiento de la Comisión
the
Reguladora Nacional
American
respecto del valor
infrastructure
del
seek
acuerdo de
recognition
reconocimiento mutuo de
according
ILAC
to the
para
mutual
laboratorios
recognition
acreditados.
agreement
Damos
for
la bienvenida
ILAC
a él.
for accredited
Bienvenido.
laboratories. Welcome, Earl. The floor is yours.
Good day, everyone. First of all, I want to start by thanking the IAAC community for inviting me today to speak. This is a perfect opportunity for me to give back because I've received great support from the community through our observations of the process. So I want to thank the powers to be for this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts on how the accreditation process can be utilized in different industries, and we can work with our regulators, government authorities, to make sure that their confidence is maintained in the process. So first of all, I want to kind of give you an idea about what the nuclear industry has done in regard to this topic. So the U.S. nuclear industry is regulated by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The commercial power industry has gained the recognition and endorsement of the NRC for the use of the accreditation process for approving and qualifying our calibration and testing labs. And this is based solely on the robustness of the process, but we had to prove that. Under this particular process, nuclear utilities and our suppliers can procure commercial grade calibration services and testing services from laboratories that are accredited to ISO 17025 by an accreditation body that is a signatory to the ILAC accreditation cooperation. As many of you know, ILAC is in the process of transitioning to the global AACI. So it's important to understand how we got here. Prior to the recognition by the NRC, our industry was required by law to perform our own on-site assessments of all of our calibration and test laboratories that provide services for what we call nuclear safety-related applications. Now, these assessments were performed on a triennial basis, and not only did the actual nuclear plants, operating plants, were required to observe this law, all of our suppliers all around the world, if they provided goods and services to our reactors, they were also required to perform their own assessments of calibration and test labs on a triennial basis. So a little bit about safety related to kind of help you understand where we are. So safety related from a nuclear standpoint, we're talking about systems, structures, and components. And this includes services also that are relied upon to maintain the functionality of our reactors during and following a design basis accident. An example of a design basis accident would be, for instance, an earthquake or tsunami, or loss of off-site power, complete blackness at the plant. We still have to be able to maintain control of the reactor and shut it down safely, maintain it in a safe shutdown condition, and also mitigate the consequences of any accidents. Overall goal of the NRC and the nuclear industry is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Now, as you can imagine, we have a global supply chain. So we're procuring nuclear fuel components from countries like France and Germany. We're also purchasing huge forgings from Japan and Korea. And in many cases, these are the only sources of this material because back in the late 80s, when the US not downsized, but pretty much stopped building nuclear reactors, a lot of our suppliers that were domestic ceased operations. We're also buying transformers and electrical components from Brazil, products from China. I was recently on an assessment for chemical products that were provided by Italy and France and Germany. And all of these suppliers provide services. The goods and services that they provide are based on calibration and testing that are procured from laboratories, in many cases that are accredited to 17025. So as you can see, laboratory testing and calibration of M&TE are essential for the operation of these nuclear reactors that generate carbon-free electricity and essentially anchors the economic activity across America. And there's no getting around the global supply chain. But before we discuss about what it actually took to maintain the support of our regulator, I want to tell you a little bit more about my industry. So currently there are about 94 nuclear plants operating in the United States, which generates about 20% of our electricity. I should mention that we're in the process of starting construction on some new reactors. So that number is set to grow here within the next 5 years, probably maybe even double. Now, the new reactors that we're talking about building are not necessarily the massive 1,200, 1,500 megawatt facilities. They're called small modular reactors where they'll generate maybe a tenth of that, and they're able to come online a lot quicker. And the capital investment is not as great upfront. And our industry is bonded through the Nuclear Procurement Issues Corporation. And this Nuclear Procurement Issues Corporation is a organization that represents all of the U.S. power plants in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and in addition to the North American utilities, we're proud of our international representation. Spain, Sweden, you can see there. Slovenia, United Arab Emirates is a country we recently added within the last 5 years. Korea, Taiwan, and so forth. We have had dialogue with countries like France, England. They have expressed interest in joining our group, and those discussions are ongoing. A little bit about the law and the requirements of the U.S. nuclear power industry and the rules that NUPIC has to operate under. So when it comes to quality standards, the U.S. nuclear industry works under the Code of Federal Regulations, 10 CFR 50, Appendix B, which is titled the Quality Assurance Criteria for Nuclear Power Plants and Fuel Reprocessing Plants. Now, safety-related items and services must be procured from suppliers that implement a 10 CFR 50 Appendix B program. Now, these programs are robust. They're all in nuclear. They're under the jurisdiction of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In many cases, nuclear is 70, 80% of their business. So they're all in. They're all the nuclear standards, not just the 10 CFR 50 Appendix B, but all the lower standards, implementing standards they're committed to. But as I mentioned back in the late 80s, the U.S. stopped building nuclear power plants. So a lot of companies that were providing goods and services to our industry, they ceased operation. So we developed a process where we could still procure items and services that still had that rigor the technical adequacy and so forth through an upgrade process that we call commercial grade dedication. I want to take a minute here just to kind of talk about what commercial grade dedication is and how it applies to this particular discussion that we're talking. So commercial grade dedication is an acceptance process undertaken to provide reasonable assurance that a commercial grade item to be used as a basic component, that is in the safety related application, will perform its intended safety function. And in this respect, it is deemed equivalent to an item that was designed and manufactured under the Appendix B program. So we're talking about items and services that are used across different industries that may not be nuclear unique, may not have been designed with nuclear in mind, but they're rigorous, they're robust, and they have the technical adequacy that we would expect. And this process is achieved by what we call identifying critical characteristics of the item and verifying their acceptability by a commercial audit. So what we try to do is we try to look at the particular service, and through an evaluation, we determine what's critical about that service or item. If we're talking about a particular component, like let's just say a nut or bolt, we're talking about the material is important, the dimensions are important, perhaps the hardness, those things, maybe coating, those are important things about that item. So what we were able to do is to take that same thought process and to apply it to services, for instance, calibration services and testing services. So our industry, through engineering and through quality assurance, we were able to determine the critical characteristics for a calibration service. And we have them listed here. Now, the number one that we talked about here is very germane to what Maria talked about. This is the traceability of calibration and standards to nationally recognized bodies, NIST. In the case with Colombia is INM. And there's other countries with, well, I should say almost all countries have a National Metrology Institute. And those National Metrology Institutes are bound together through the CIPM and BIPM agreements, mutual recognition agreements. The next critical characteristic that we determined was important is calibrations are performed in accordance with written procedures and instructions. Documented training and qualifications of personnel. You want people performing these activities to be knowledgeable and have been trained and signed off as capable of performing those intended jobs. The environmental controls, temperature, humidity, vibration, calibrations must be performed in an environment that's suitable for the item. The adequacy, accuracy, and stability. We're talking about tolerances, uncertainties, and ranges of measurements and so forth. Intervals of calibration for standards. So items have to be calibrated on a regular basis, and you don't decide what that regular basis is. You don't decide that in the middle of it. You decide that up front, so you know that an item has a calibration frequency or period of 1 year, 5 years, or whatever it may be. Now, because of the electronic age, a lot of software has a lot of M&T has software embedded, so we have to look at the validity and how the items are verified and validated. If you pick up a piece of calibration equipment, you want to be able to readily determine whether it's in calibration or if it's out of calibration. Has the due date been expired? Out of tolerance and corrective action. If an item is identified to be out of tolerance during its regular calibration period, how do you look back to see what impact that has had on the previous use of that item? And if there's any subcontractors involved, any sub-suppliers involved with that process, you want to know about that. And the laboratory that's performing the calibration, they should have controls for that area. And then finally, the actual documentation. What is the customer going to get back, illustrating that they received a valid calibration? So that was calibration. Let's talk a little bit about testing. Critical characteristics for laboratory testing services. So again, we underwent an evaluation to determine what's critical. What are the characteristics of a good laboratory testing service? Well, first of all, the item that's coming in for testing must be identified and traceable throughout the process. The testing for the required parameters is performed in accordance with some type of industry recognized standard or some methodology that's been validated and approved to provide reliable results. Next, actual testing is performed in accordance with written procedure. Next, testing is performed by trained and qualified personnel. A very important element of this is the training qualifications and the documentation of those individuals. MNTE, including chemical standards, are traceable and calibrated. That gets back to some of Maria's discussion on metrology. A lot of these items are traceable right back to the NMI or some type of natural law. Next, traceability of the test results must be maintained. So can you tie the actual test results to the item that was tested? And finally, certification documentation. That must be robust and it must be traceable, must be signed off by the person with the right authority and so forth. So now that we kind of understand what we were going through in terms of the global market, where in a lot of countries, the accreditation process was already relied upon. We were going to countries like France and procuring things like steam generators and reactor vessel heads. And COFRAC is the accreditation body, or at least one of the accreditation bodies in France. And a lot of the laboratories that were performing calibration services or testing services, they were accredited by COFRAC. And so the suppliers over in that area, they were taking credit for that process, but they were outside of U.S. law, which requires not only the utilities, but our suppliers to perform triennial assessments, on-site assessments. So it's always said that the necessity is the mother of invention. So we had a need here and we had a void because we had to get our products from these locations that provided good services. And we had to find a way that we could get the NRC to recognize the validity, the robustness of the accreditation process and still maintain the adequacy and the quality that we were used to having and that's demanded, I should say. So first of all, in order to gain NRC recognition, we joined IAAC as a stakeholder member. Now, the stakeholder membership is a different class of membership outside of the conformity assessment bodies and the accreditation bodies, but it gives us access to all the documentation, gives us access to meetings, gives us access to the accreditation bodies and so forth, and the regional bodies. And we learned a lot through this process here. And what we learned was that perhaps if we could observe the process, get more informed about how things work, we could probably go to the NRC and present this to the NRC. And because everything was completely reasonable that we were expected to see, that we may be able to get the NRC to recognize the process. So we were able to arrange an observation of at that time it was APLAC, APLAC, has recently been changed to APAC. But we were able to observe a meeting and we were able to observe the rigor of the decision-making process. We understood the MRA council reviews and how they ensure standards for accreditation are established and met and maintained. We observed the accreditation assessments for both calibration and testing, and we invited the NRC to participate with us. We observed the complete ISO 17011 peer evaluation of two ABs. So the peer evaluation is really a strength of the ILAC MRA, where each accreditation body has to undergo a peer evaluation by several ABs to verify that they're meeting the standards, the 17011 and the 17025 standards. So we started this back, I think it was 2014, where we actually observed JAB, Japanese Accreditation Board, and also A2LA. So after performing these evaluations, we were able to conclude the following. The activities observed were found to be essentially equivalent to what we would do during our own audits and surveys of calibration and test labs. And we were able to prove that those items that we identified as critical characteristics for dedication of calibration and testing services were already essentially a part of the accreditation process. They were already built into 17025 and so forth. The observation teams verified that the overall operation of the peer evaluation under the ILAC process is very robust, comprehensive, and definitely in compliance with 17011. The peer evaluations under the ILAC process were found to be true peers in that they currently led or direct other accreditation bodies. So we're talking high-level individuals that are coming from other accreditation bodies. And trust me, their interest is in maintaining the integrity of the whole process. So they come in, they give the accreditation bodies a good look. They point out problems, they identify strengths, just overall robustness of that system, that process we're very pleased with. And it's performance-based and done to very high standards. Also, conclusions that we came up with were that lead assessors and their technical assessor experts were found to be very knowledgeable and possessed extensive experience in the areas they assessed. A lot of cases, these people have master degrees and PhD degrees, and we found this to be a strength. Now, doing our own assessments, we take technical representatives also, but typically our technical assessors or in a lot of cases they're more generic. So one week the person may be looking at a pump manufacturer or a valve manufacturer or a air conditioner manufacturer. And what we found with the ILAC process and the assessments, they typically try to zero in on a person that had direct experience in that particular area. If it was a chemical lab that was being evaluated, they tried to find a chemical expert. So we thought that was a strength. But overall, the operations of the ABs were found to be in accordance with 17011. The scope of accreditation specified by ABs and laboratories were verified to actually represent the capabilities of the lab. So we wanted to have confidence that if you picked up a scope of accreditation or accreditation certificate, that what was actually printed on that sheet is factual and is based on some robustness. And we were able to verify that. Again, the AB staff members. So we're talking about the accreditation bodies. Very knowledgeable, very skilled, technically qualified for the functions that they perform. And again, each AB that we visited, they had the overall goal of maintaining the integrity of the whole process. So there were no shortcuts. If they went out and observed or evaluated another AB, there were no softballs. They gave them a good hard scrub. And so they have well-maintained accreditation processes which are applied consistently to accreditations for testing and calibration laboratories. The actual laboratories, and I think I heard Maria speak of CABs, conformity assessment bodies. They are being properly assessed to 17025. The accreditation assessments were found to be technically equivalent to our, or even better in some cases, of our NUPIC style commercial grade surveys. And again, in our industry, performance-based is very important, not just a paperwork review, but they dug in and they got down in the trenches. Very high standard was observed. So in order to secure NRC report, we took our observations, what we noted during our observations of peer evaluations, our observations of the assessments of cabs, and we wrote a paper to the NRC and asked for endorsement. The NRC endorsed the process, and they had some caveats, and I just want to briefly discuss what those were. And they're pretty, they're definitely doable, and considering what we get in return, they're very minor from our standpoint. So we came up with the document that I just mentioned, the NEI 1405 document, and it describes the conditions for use of the process, where a utility or a supplier to the nuclear industry does not have to take or go out and perform their own assessments. They can take credit for a laboratory, a test lab, or a calibration lab being accredited to 17025 by a AB that's signatory to the IAAC MRA. And as I mentioned, the IAAC MRA is still in effect over a 3-year transition period. I believe it'll eventually be recognized as a global ACI. But right now we're talking about IAAC. So the first thing is that the user, whether it be the utility or a supplier, they're required to perform an evaluation just to make sure that the laboratory is accredited to 17025 by a AB that's a signatory to the MRA. And what we learned in our travels is that there are some accreditation bodies out there that will accredit laboratories to 17025 that are not signatories to the IAAC MRA. And we have not observed the strength of their process. So we limited our use of this process to labs that are accredited by ABs that are signatories. We added a few other things, for instance, like when we procure calibration services, it's not enough just to be accredited, but we wanted them to be accredited for the actual scope of use. And those scope of accreditations are clearly described in the scope of accreditations. Same thing for testing. This last thing is one thing that came up during the pandemic. So our whole process is based on, the nuclear process is based on site evaluation of suppliers. And during the pandemic, there were a lot of cases where we could not perform our on-site assessments, and the same thing is true in the ILAC community, the IAAC community, where you had to rely on remote assessments. And trust me, this is clearly built into the standard, the 17011 standard and the 17025 standard. It allows remote accreditations, and they're essential and necessary in some cases. But the NRC did not want us to rely on remote accreditations forever. So we have a something that we put into our evaluation process. Is just to verify that the laboratory has undergone a on-site assessment within the past 48 months, for years. And this was something that was pretty much we worked out with the NRC. Warren Merkel, I think, is our next presenter. He helped us work this the language out in this particular case, and we came to a happy medium on this. So actually, one of the things that we noted during our observation process is that laboratories, when they're assessed, they are evaluated against how well they do contract review and how well they interpret the customer's purchase order. And we felt that was a strong process. So we felt that any conditions or additional requirements that we have, if we built those into our purchase orders, then they would be complied with. So we're just requiring in our POs that the service is accredited We all know that a lab that's accredited doesn't necessarily have to give you accredited service, especially if you don't request that. So we request accredited services. We want as found and as left calibration data when the item is found to be out of tolerance. We want identification of the standards that are used. The accreditation subcontracting is something that has been probably one of the sticking points, and that is our process requires us to evaluate the scope of accreditation for the lab that's doing the work. And in many cases, when the lab is subcontracting the work, then they're taking responsibility for doing that evaluation to verify that the subcontracted lab is properly accredited. And that was at the time something that we couldn't live with someone else doing that particular evaluation to determine the actual adequacy of their scope. So we maintain that. Now, if we're contacted by a lab, we can generally work some things out, but we want to know about that if they're going to subcontract the work. Again, this idea where you have to have an on-site assessment within the past 48 months, we impose that in our purchase orders. And then finally, any additional scope or any additional requirements that need to be in the PO, we just want to ensure that the customers who use this process are putting those in there. If you want a calibration based on a 10-point versus a standard 5-point calibration, then you have to request that. So in order to maintain the NRC's recognition of the process, we are required to maintain our membership in IAAC. We recently was admitted as a stakeholder member in global ACI. We're happy about that. We monitor the process. We read newsletters. We're privy to most of the emails that go out, and we generate an annual report basically indicating there have not been any major changes to the processes that we have observed. And we perform triennial observations of peer evaluation and accreditation assessments. We recently wrapped up a peer evaluation, observation of a peer evaluation of AIS in the US. We're happy to report that we have also received great, really fantastic support and recognition from the regional accreditation bodies. We've worked with APAC, IAAC, the European accreditation bodies. We've actually done evaluations of observations of evaluations at A2LA, ATS in Serbia. I mentioned JAB of Japan, Perry Johnson in the US, ANAP here in the US, CGCRE in Brazil, and I mentioned AIS. So these observations that we perform could not be possible without the support of the peer evaluation teams. So when we're trying to identify which AB we're going to witness next, we actually have to get permission from the peer evaluation team, the team lead. It goes all the way up through the regional bodies to get permission. And then when we're going out to the actual CABs, the conformity assessment bodies, we have to get permission to visit those labs. And of course, we're signing NDAs and non-disclosure agreements and so forth, but whatever it takes. But what I want to gladly say is that the process, the support that we're getting is phenomenal. We're treated like regular members of the team. We have access to opening meetings, office assessments, evaluations at the lab. We have a look at the final reports, closing meetings, the evaluation of the findings, all of this. We were treated like members of the team, but we're a fly on the wall. We try not to. Well, we do. We do not interfere with the evaluation at all. We're observers. In off periods, we may talk a little bit to the ABs or to the assessors, but really no direct interface with the cabs that are being evaluated. So this is just really an example of incredible support and partnership and cooperation between the industry and our regulator, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the stakeholders of this process. Well, that concludes my presentation. But again, I want to wrap up by thanking IAAC, particularly Savannah and Peter Unger for bringing us in. As I mentioned, this is an opportunity for us to give back. We've been asking for access to these particular evaluations for about 10 years now. And the opportunity to give back and share some of our learnings is very important to us. This process of allowing utilities to take credit for accreditation rather than doing our own assessments has saved millions of dollars. It's a recognized process. It's proven, tested. As I think the motto is tested once, accepted everywhere, or calibrated once, accepted everywhere. We fully believe in that concept. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por compartir este caso que evidencia que los
Thank you very
acuerdos
much
de
for sharing this case,
reconocimiento
that the
no
recognition
son
agreements are
únicamente
not
instrumentos
just
técnicos,
technical
también son
tools, but
puentes
they
de
are
confianza entre
also
reguladores,
trust bridges
organismos de
between
acreditación,
regulators, accreditation
laboratorios,
bodies,
industrias
labs,
y usuarios
industries,
finales.
and users.
Continuamos con
We will
nuestro
continue
evento
with our
y
event
nuestro
then,
cuarto
and our
expositor
fourth
es Warren
speaker
Merkel.
is
Él
Warren
es
Merkel.
vicepresidente de
He's a vice
políticas del
chair
ANSI,
of
National
policies for
Accreditation Board,
ANSI
y
and
vicepresidente
the
de
vice chair
IAAC.
of IAAC.
Su presentación se
His
titula
presentation is called
Infraestructura de la calidad
Quality
en Estados
Infrastructure in the
Unidos,
U.S.,
aprender del
Learning from
pasado
the
para
Past to
reconstruir
Build
el
the
futuro.
Future.
Esta intervención
This
explorará cómo la
presentation will
infraestructura de
explore
la
how
calidad de
quality
Estados Unidos
infrastructure in
apoya
the
a
U.S.
sectores
supports
ambientales y de
environmental
sostenibilidad.
sectors and
A partir de
sustainability
ejemplos
based
consolidados
on
como los
consolidated
ensayos
examples
ambientales
such
y la
as
eficiencia
the
energética,
energy
así como un caso
efficiency
de
as well
desarrollo
as
vinculado
a
con
development case
biocombustibles
linked to
sostenibles.
biofuels that are
Damos
sustainable.
la bienvenida a
We
Warren Merkel.
welcome Warren
Adelante, por
Merkel.
favor.
You have the floor, Warren.
Muchas gracias, Veronica. Buen día a todos. Good
Thank you, Veronica.
afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you may be. And it's an honor to be able to speak to you today about some cases in the US where quality infrastructure has helped in the past, and ideally taking some experiences from that and looking toward building the future. I couldn't have a better speaker to precede me than Earl, and thank you again, Earl, for providing a really fantastic example of how industry, the government, and the quality infrastructure have been able to work together to provide confidence and trust. That's what it's all about. And in the cases where I'm going to describe, I'm going to try and keep it at a relatively high level without too much detail about specific industries, regulators, because our US system is quite complex. But I do hope that we can take these learnings and apply them in the region and globally, because as the previous speakers have all indicated, it's becoming more and more important to be able to have confidence in the quality infrastructure institutions and their ability to maintain that confidence moving forward. So I'm going to take a step back. You're probably wondering why I've got this image here. First of all, I think I will be the first person to use the term artificial intelligence in all of the presentations. I cannot believe we have made it almost 2 hours without somebody saying AI, but I used AI to present this picture. And I'm wondering if anybody recognizes the quote. Of course, it's from relatively famous play, Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? Which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. What does this possibly have to do with quality infrastructure? Well, in the United States, when we use the term quality infrastructure domestically, it doesn't necessarily always have meaning. When we look at the history of using that terminology, the systems that have evolved in the US, our respective pillars of quality infrastructure as we use in this context, have evolved over more than 100 years. However, I think as the previous example indicates, and as I'll discuss moving through the presentation today, even though we don't name it quality infrastructure, we don't have a quality infrastructure law or specific institutions that focus on it. We do have a long history of solving problems in a complex environment, a large economy with multiple authorities and many industry interests. It's a very challenging environment in which to operate a quality infrastructure consistently. But I'm confident that these examples will help us reinforce some of the issues moving forward and the challenges that we have in our parts of the world. So, the overview of my presentation, I'm going to provide 3 examples of the role of quality infrastructure in solving problems. They're related to sustainability generally, and provide a robust history of how we've gotten to where we are today, and able to respond, for example, to the nuclear power industry. Talk a little bit about the successes, the lessons learned. I will tell you right now that it was not 100% successful in all cases to apply all of the pillars of the quality infrastructure, and I'll try and explain why. And then again, try and look as we're moving forward in this image, challenges for the quality infrastructure moving forward. The 4 of us as presenters knew the general theme. We did not collaborate on our specific presentations, but I think you'll see that there's some consistency, which I think then provides a little bit of support to the ideas that we have work to do to make sure that the quality infrastructure continues to meet the needs of our community. So I'll start with the first example, which is in terms of the history of these issues, is one of the earlier examples of applying what we now call quality infrastructure to challenges around environmental testing. I think all of our countries have the need to have competent, reliable, traceable test results for many purposes. We've heard about regulatory use in the nuclear power industry. We heard about in metrology. We heard about circular economy. In this case, and this was well over 30 years ago, there was a need to look at the competence and the consistency of the laboratories providing this data. And at the time, and right now still, we had many challenges. There were multiple federal laws. Earl did an excellent job of describing the regulations around just the nuclear power industry. The range of laws at the federal level, as well as our 50 states and their respective authorities, their regulations, their needs, bringing that community together required a great deal of engagement and a great deal of cooperation. At the time, there was not a consistent set of standardized test methods for some of these characteristics. Again, we're talking 30 years ago. And laboratory accreditation, as we know it under the ISO standards, was really in its infancy in the United States. There were standard reference materials available from our National Metrology Institute, but they were not necessarily of the ranges and uncertainties and concentrations needed to support this work. And while we had proficiency testing in a number of areas in our economy, our broader quality infrastructure, for this area, there was not a lot of consistency. And again, it was before the international standards and practices around conducting proficiency testing and the accreditation of those providers even existed. As is often the case with these issues, there was a need for timing to be addressed. The timeliness of the response, mandates at the state and federal level to make things happen affected the way that the community was able to come together. From the quality infrastructure perspective, there were a number of positive responses that allowed for this process to become successful. Interestingly, it was one of the best examples of the federal government working with state regulators to cooperate on this shared issue. The central government agency that was responsible for the environment worked with the respective state environmental regulators and provided funding and resources to allow quality infrastructure as we know it to respond. Perhaps even more importantly, or equally importantly, is the fact that they recognize the need to have a public-private partnership. The laboratories in this case that were performing this testing were largely in the private sector. And in order for this to be successful, there was a need for strong representation from the laboratory stakeholder community. That's one of the things that I'll continue to emphasize in all three of the examples that I'll provide, because it's critical to have that part of the quality infrastructure represented effectively, not just through the lens of an accreditor like IAAC or others, but as an important partner in this process. And that happened in this case, and we were fortunate to have an organization that represented the laboratory's interests in this process. The National Metrology Institute undertook focused efforts with assistance and funding from the other government agency to develop the high-level metrology standards necessary and engage with the secondary market for both reference materials and proficiency testing programs. I had the benefit of being a brand new person in the accreditation community at the time and saw some difficult conversations, but productive efforts to bring stakeholders together to ensure that we had the metrological basis, we had the ability in the private sector to respond, and we had the capabilities to address the overall needs. Now, one of the areas where the outcome was not necessarily in line with what we would try and accomplish today is that accreditation of the laboratories was already written into the laws in many states, requiring the state to exercise that authority. In the process of building this confidence, we were able to ensure that the private sector accreditation system that had been developing and has continued to gain support through our economy over the 3 decades since, to leverage that authority where possible in order to make use of the private sector. Again, the previous speaker talked about using that global system to support and replace where possible the need to use government resources. And that was largely effective in this case, although when I talk about the lessons, it wasn't 100% accepted. But there was a really important outcome, which whether it was using private sector accreditation as support or the various states having their own accreditation systems, there was a level of mutual recognition among those authorities based on the trust in the criteria and the approaches used. That's critical then, and is even more critical now as we listen to Christian and we listen to some of these presentations about global supply chains. Providing confidence through quality infrastructure to the authorities of responsibility is important for our ongoing acceptance. Equally important is to develop private sector organizations to provide that venue for coordination, standards development, and the evolution over those decades to ensure that as the systems change, the requirements change, the technology advances, that this system that was established based on the quality infrastructure components that can support it is able to evolve. So what are the lessons out of this? Again, without getting into the details of the regulations, the timeline, there's a lot of history there, but a few lessons are critical, I think, to this audience. Within the description broadly of the quality infrastructure, all of our presenters have talked about the importance of the legal and regulatory framework within our respective countries and the region. The biggest lesson for me out of this is to find solutions that work within that framework and constraints. I chose this image intentionally because you may not be able to put all of the pieces together in the way that we typically would expect, leveraging the quality infrastructure in an ideal setting. But if we're able to make those connections and provide some consistency, that in and of itself puts us in a stronger position to support the global needs that are evolving every day. One of the points that Maria made earlier, which is really important, it's ideal to engage with the policymakers while they're developing the policy. It becomes really difficult once the terminology, once the approach gets built into law, regulations, government policy. That's hard to change. And so the more we can engage early with all of the quality infrastructure represented, the more likely we will be in having success in the end. The cooperation between the authorities and the private sector is critical. That was clear in all of the presentations today. One of the things I want to emphasize here is that in this case, not only was it helpful to the states, to the laboratory community, and ultimately to the citizens of the United States, but it also built a really strong foundation and awareness among the regulators involved, the Metrology Institute, the laboratory community, the standards developers, and the accreditation bodies. That's critical. You may not get a win every time, but when you work together in good faith toward a shared goal of trust in the system, the next time, when you're able to ideally engage early, then you have that shared experience and trust between the institutions. In this case, we have 50 states. The system that was enabled by this approach is less than half of the states directly engaged. But all of the states that have environmental programs and that are under the federal regulations are using consistent approaches, leveraging their authority in a way that provides predictability and the ability for those laboratory results to be accepted. That's critical. I'm going to stop with this lesson. One last thing that I'll take from this is, again, the timeline. This work started, the laws around clean water, clean air, and managing the environment were from the 70s and 80s. We are at a point now, 40 years later, to be able to say that this is a first step and a ongoing functioning example of cooperation among those involved in the process. I think that's an important thing to emphasize. The next example that I have is around energy efficiency. And again, looking at this through the lens of what was the need at the time. Actually, two of our government agencies were given different approaches and mandates to providing the industry with a voluntary, market-driven, consumer-facing program to increase energy efficiency. Now, I've intentionally not put the program into the slides. It's many of you may recognize from the United States the Energy Star label. But I wanted to pull this a little bit abstraction from this because this is happening in many of our countries. And there's some interesting lessons from how it's evolved in the US, but also some challenges as we move forward. At the time, one of the biggest challenges was that there were some similar federal programs trying to address energy efficiency in a market that was moving very quickly, with manufacturers looking at technologies that are evolving very rapidly. There was a challenge in having standardized product specifications and test methods at the time, which easily was able to be addressed more so than perhaps some of the other challenges in the previous example. And there was clearly over time a recognition of market surveillance, which is obviously a component of quality infrastructure, to ensure that those products that made it to the marketplace continued to meet the requirements of the programs. So how did the quality infrastructure respond? The federal scheme owner in this case really took tremendous effort to foster development of the product specifications, the overall scheme, and the methodologies that were used with stakeholder input. Industry, conformity assessment, standards developers, industry associations of manufacturers were all at the table to provide input. Where we've evolved is a combination of federal government standards that were built into law, supported by a wide range of private sector standards that were developed to ensure that the products are able to continue to evolve and meet the needs. In energy efficiency, at least in the US, we had the benefit that the electrical measurements largely involved in the actual measurement of efficiency. Once you have the methodology established, the measurements are relatively straightforward and used in other sectors. But there were some emerging challenges. For example, looking at energy efficient lighting, not so much necessarily at the energy efficiency measurement as it is the comparability of the product. If it's more energy efficient, but does not perform in a way that the market expects, provide the same output in the marketplace that the less efficient version did, that would be a problem. And so there's some really interesting and important work done by the Metrology Institute to address those specific characteristics and provide support to fill the gaps. Over time, there was increased engagement of the conformity assessment infrastructure and accreditation. As it stands today, not all of the areas of the program are based on accredited certification, but a vast majority of those appliances and the electrical products in particular are tested by accredited laboratories and certified by accredited certification bodies. That was helped by the timing. When the agency was looking at this, now we had the evolution in the global system. ILAC and IAF at the time were able to respond, and the accreditation infrastructure in the US and abroad was able to support those needs. And then finally, there was a defined post-market surveillance and industry comparison program for various areas to ensure that confidence with the consumers. So what do we learn from this outcome? One of the most effective motivations for adoption in this case was the government looking at the voluntary nature, but providing financial and market incentives that drive adoption and innovation. Earlier, there was discussion around the financial cost of establishing quality infrastructure. And so, not to get too far into the policy development, but in the legal framework that underlies the quality infrastructure, it's important to have tools at the disposal of the regulatory authorities to both motivate the market and then inform improvements when the market indicates there are problems. For those of you that are familiar with the Energy Star program, there were some periods of time where there was some questions about the validity of the outputs, and the program was able to use quantitative metrics to expand acceptance and ensure longevity. This program has a long history of success, a lot of data on the incremental improvement in the energy efficiency of products in the marketplace. And that helps decision makers, it helps regulators, even if government policy shifts away from a focus on sustainability, as has happened in our country recently. The big lesson that I want to take from this as a specific example is how small the actual government effort is because they're leveraging the quality infrastructure resources. This is not a huge government program that requires a significant amount of funding. It's important and it's got staff that are working at the government level, but the vast majority of the resources to demonstrate conformity are happening in the private sector, supported by the industry using those services. That allows those at the government authority to truly focus on the integrity of the program, growing it sustainably, looking at the targets for efficiency, and enforcing the requirements of the program when there are problems. That's a key benefit of the quality infrastructure to be emphasized with policymakers, leveraging the private sector, leveraging the system in a way that maximizes government impact. Now, again, this was a national scheme. There is some advantages to that because of the policy incentives and so on. There are drawbacks because I know that in many different countries in the region, we have different approaches to energy efficiency labeling and evaluation. And so the market can sometimes move in a direction that would is not entirely globally compatible. But the underlying quality infrastructure and the development supports all of the issues that we've talked about in the previous presentations. So 2 lessons of the past. One where I'm looking at a more recent trajectory, which is low carbon and clean fuels. Now, there's a broader category of biofuels. Generally, I'm focusing a little bit here just to provide some context around the quality infrastructure for reducing the overall carbon footprint from transportation fuels. So there are a range of different biofuels. I'm looking at transportation fuels, and the idea is to encourage the deployment of cleaner alternatives. Now, in that, and Christian in particular talked about some of the challenges around even using the term cleaner. What exactly does that mean? And how are we sure that those types of claims are legitimate, particularly when it gets very complicated and the consumers that are making the decisions may not have all of the technical expertise or the time to investigate. So there are a lot of challenges here that continue. The compatibility of those products and their adoption in evolving markets, that's challenging. Just like in the previous example, the first example, in our case, there are federal level activities, but there are also multiple states that are developing regulations and programs as we speak. And so there is a challenge to ensure to the extent possible that that's aligned. The data that support the claims around the carbon footprint of these fuels, that looks at their characteristics, is different. It's a different kind of measurement and standards in many cases. And so there's a need to ensure the validity and verification of that information across different types of supply chains. As we look at this, conformity assessment approaches are being developed. I'll talk a little bit about that in the response. But when there is a need, and in our country, we've been using supplementing fuels with biological materials for some time, the market will find an answer. And sometimes it involves conformity assessment as we describe it. Sometimes it doesn't. So how is the quality infrastructure responding? And I have an asterisk there because we're looking at an ongoing situation. We're still working on this. But the National Metrology Institute has been working for over 20 years on research methodologies and measurements to ensure that biomaterials that are used are compatible with the needs of the traditional petroleum-based fuels. As I mentioned, the federal government as well as state agencies are developing programs that involve incentives, but also standards to demonstrate the impact of using these cleaner fuels on overall carbon emissions. From the standards pillar, there are international consensus standards being developed, not just for the materials themselves, but for broader systems for managing them and how to conduct the conformity assessment. Validation and verification bodies are providing assurance according to appropriate requirements. In some cases, they're using accreditation as we would identify under, for example, ISO IEC 17029 and the related standards. Sometimes it's not. And it's an ongoing effort to ensure that the quality infrastructure is responding appropriately. So we'll call this a work in progress, but it identifies and looks at challenges that are particularly important in our part of the world. So what do we learn from these moving forward, these US-based experiences over a long history, and how do we address this in our quality infrastructure moving forward? Engagement is the first big lesson. Engage with the regulators, the authorities, and most importantly, engage with the conformity assessment and stakeholder communities. One of the things that looking in the Americas, we are really fortunate to have, for example, the Quality Infrastructure Council of the Americas. And we're working together among the accreditation community, the metrology community, and the standards community. But the voice of those other parts of the quality infrastructure, the very important voice of conformity assessment, is just as important. And we need to ensure that we are evolving our systems for coordination to address that need. I think all of the previous speakers mentioned the need for agility and adaptability of our quality infrastructure to address the needs for circular economy, but sustainability more broadly, and evolution of emerging technologies. The world is changing very fast. The quality infrastructure has been incredibly successful at providing the support and trust in the past. We just need to be ensure that we are agile enough to respond in the time frames that are necessary. Resources are really important. In the examples that I mentioned, there was government support for developing the metrology, for developing the standards, and in some cases, the other aspects of conformity assessment and quality infrastructure. Without those resources, or without being able to make the argument for the value proposition of industry supporting them, and Earl did a great job of that, saying what the impact has been financially on industry. If we can't articulate that value to government or the private sector, then the quality infrastructure will not be able to evolve, and there will be other solutions, perhaps with less of the rigor and support that we enjoy currently. And again, there's no time to continue to figure this out. We have to be responsive now. If evolution demands it, and the marketplace is moving quickly enough that the quality infrastructure has to become part of that solution. Thank you very much. Thanks to the previous speakers for making my presentation very easy to do. And with that, Veronica, I'll pass it back to you.
Sí, muchísimas gracias a
Thank
Warren
you,
por
Warren,
esta
for
intervención
this
interesante.
intervention, which was
También
very
agradecer a
interesting. I
todos
would like to thank
nuestros
all of
expositores del
our
día de hoy. Gracias por
presenters
construir capacidades
today,
técnicas para la
building technical
acreditación correspondiente,
capacities,
generando
relevant
patrones
accreditation
y
programs,
confianza entre operadores y partes
relevant
interesadas es un gran
standards
desafío.
is a great challenge.
Sabemos que el tiempo
We
siempre resulta
know that
corto frente a temas tan
time is
relevantes como
always
estos,
short
pero
for
confiamos
such
en que las
relevant
ideas
topics, but we
compartidas
trust
el
that
día
the
de hoy
ideas
aporten
shared
elementos
today
concretos
contribute
para
with
fortalecer
concrete
los
elements
sistemas
for
nacionales y
strengthening
regionales de
the
infraestructura
national and regional
gubernamental.
systems for the
Y
quality
ahora
infrastructure. And
abrimos
now
el
we
espacio de
will
preguntas
open
y
the
respuestas.
questions and answers
Pedimos
space,
a quienes
and we
están aquí
will
conectados que
ask
puedan
the
presentar sus
persons who
preguntas y
are in the
tenemos la
meeting
primera.
to present their
Vamos a
questions, submit
pasar
their questions. We have the person,
pedir a Christian
so we will ask
Schoen que nos
Christian
ayude
Schoen
con la
to
siguiente.
help us with the
¿Cómo
next one.
permiten o
how do you allow or make it difficult the current system for the transition to a circular economy? We would like we would ask the presenters to be brief because we have several questions. The floor is yours, Kristen.
Can you please repeat the question?
Sí, con todo gusto. ¿Cómo
Yes.
permiten o
How
dificultan
does it
los
make it
sistemas
difficult or
actuales
easy the
de
current
infraestructura de la
systems
realidad
of quality
a la
infrastructure for
hacia
the
hacia
transition
una economía
to
circular?
a circular economy?
Okay, right. So it's a generic question that we posed at the beginning, and I think partly I already addressed it in the presentation, but maybe a little bit more concrete because I'm currently involved in the development of a quality infrastructure program for a circular economy in ASEAN, so in the area of South East Asia, for basically the 11 countries participating in this association. And that's on behalf of an international client. So what we understand designing this program in the first place is that circular economy is a relatively new economic model. And we were trying to develop the quality infrastructure for something that has not fully arrived in the economies of these countries. And it has arrived to a very different extent, in different sectors to a different extent. So we need to focus, we need to prioritize in the first place. We need to see what sectors are relevant. We're talking currently about rubber, for instance, the rubber sector, but we also talk about electronics, and we talk about construction materials. So a few sectors and a few more where we can pilot quality infrastructure services for this very specific sectors. And then, of course, as mentioned in my presentation, QI for circular economy is addressing all the different pillars of the quality infrastructure. So we need to work on standardization, adopt international standards in this area in general, but then also for the specific sectors. We need to look at metrology and equip national metrology institutes, and then, of course, also secondary calibration labs in order to provide the necessary services for the industries. We also need to look at the conformity assessment, the different services that are needed. So it's based on the needs of the industry and of the communities that are part of these pilot programs. We need to convince the different stakeholders that, first of all, circular economy is important. Secondly, that quality infrastructure for circular economy is important, actually to enable the implementation of circular economy principles and methods, and then put that all into a program. So actually it's a journey that just began, and it's slowly gaining traction. And of course, it's a big advantage if the respective development programs and national authorities, also the regulators, are on board. Actually, as Warren said before, are engaging in this process and are trying jointly to convince the community that this is important to do and that the necessary resources are made available. So that was a quick answer without going too much into detail.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias.
Thank
Las
you
preguntas
very
que tenemos
much.
para
The
Rosario,
questions that we have
María del
for
Rosario González,
Rosario,
las
Maria
vamos
del
a enviar por
Rosario
correo
González, we
electrónico, ya la
will answer
mencioné.
them through
Tenemos una
email.
pregunta
We have a
para
question
Mayhorn,
for
por favor, que esté atento.
Earl Mayhorn.
Considerando la creciente
Considering the
dependencia
growing
global de cadenas de
dependency at the global
suministro
level on supply
complejas para
chains that are
tecnologías
complex for
críticas,
critical technologies,
¿cree que la experiencia
do
del
you
sector
think that
nuclear con
the
acreditación
nuclear
internacional
sector's
podría
experience
servir
with
de
international
modelo para
accreditation
otras
could be a model
industrias de alto
for
riesgo
other
que buscan
industries of high risk
confianza
that
regulatoria
look for
como también
confidence or trust
interoperabilidad global?
and global interoperability?
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You
Sí,
can hear me.
adelante.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yeah, so in response to that question, I would start by saying that standardization Working to the same music sheet has definitely helped the process. I believe that this example of partnership collaboration has proven that the accreditation community, the ILAC community, the global AIC community is willing to listen. They're open to suggestions, recommendations. They want to understand the needs of regulatory bodies around the world. That was proven through the access that we were given to the cabs, to the accreditation bodies, and so forth. So I think this is a perfect model. And believe me, each industry will probably have their own caveats, their own exceptions, their own unique needs. But I think having the standardization that the process offers now, you can take any set of rules or standards or requirements and weave it into a process that's already known and has proven to be robust and satisfactory. Thank you.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Y
Thank you.
continuamos también. Tengo una pregunta para Warren, por
Now
favor.
we have a question for Warren Merkel. From what was mentioned, which is the more challenging aspect for establishing a quality infrastructure for supporting the environmental and sustainability sectors?
That's a very interesting question. I think to take a step back, I think one of the important considerations is what is the intended outcome, because that will determine then the needs from the quality infrastructure. There are global systems that are evolving that can support a need in a given country through our networks around metrology, the use of international standards, and the conformity assessment through accredited conformity assessment bodies. I think in terms of looking at the biggest challenge, if you are in a situation perhaps like Maria was describing, where you don't have the metrology capability and need to develop it because you are not in a position to leverage another country, that measurement infrastructure is something that takes time. We have in the accreditation community the ability to be flexible. The standards community can respond and typically has responded effectively globally, but it's not always possible to be responsive in the timeframes without having the agility built into those systems. And not to pick on metrology because she's not here anymore, but I having worked at a metrology institute, to get those measurements right that are the basis often for the measurement and trust, that's going to take time. And so it emphasizes the need for agility by leveraging each other's resources in the region of the Americas and globally.
Ok, muy bien, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
Tenemos aquí
We
una
have
pregunta
a
nuevamente
question
para Cristian, por
for
favor.
Christian.
En su opinión,
In your opinion,
¿cuáles son las condiciones
which are
clave
the key
que los reguladores
conditions
deben
that
observar
regulators
antes de
should
estar
observe
dispuestos a depositar
before
ese nivel de
being
confianza en el
available
sistema
for
de acreditación
trusting the
internacional?
accreditation system, the international accreditation system?
Christian, you're on mute.
Si puede ayudarnos.
Thank you,
Déjeme el
Varun. Yes,
micrófono.
I
Gracias.
noticed. Thank you. I understand that you asked for regulators to trust the international accreditation system, if I understood that correctly. Okay. Well, it's regulators also and other players in the QI system that needs to trust accreditation in the international system. I mean, there are built-in mechanisms that make trust or accreditation the highest level of trust creator within the country, but also between countries. So basically, the checkers of the checkers. So it's very important that there's a belief that these mechanisms work, that mutual recognition agreements between accreditation bodies around the world are trustworthy, that they are working. We're working on that when we work in specific countries. Like, for example, I work in Vietnam and the Philippines with national accreditation bodies and other stakeholders in that area. And it's a permanent discussion in how far these mechanisms work and how trustworthy they are. But it's something that is in the end necessary to believe and necessary to build confidence here. Because without this trust, without the trust as the highest level, so to speak, in the pyramid of quality infrastructure, the whole system wouldn't work. So it's an effort to convince, but also to make the national accreditation bodies ready to invest in additional accreditation schemes, ready to invest in building assessors, ready to engage with the other QI stakeholders in the country and so forth in order to engage stronger and build the trust within the country and then cross-border. Thank you.
And maybe I could build on, if it's okay, Veronica, if I could add to that. I think
Sí, adelante.
thanks. I think there's also a need to recognize that in all of these decisions, when you're trying to balance the cost of developing the quality infrastructure elements, for example, as Christian rightly pointed out, the accreditation body would have to invest time and resources to develop the appropriate expertise to be able to determine the competence of conformity assessment bodies. It's always a risk-based decision. And I think that's one of the interesting challenges when we talk about circular economy, is that more and more the data that are used in a given application, whether it's a life cycle calculation for a given product, or it's a evaluation of the carbon footprint of a material, we don't always know through the supply chain where that information will come from. So in the past, if we're looking at energy efficiency, for example, the risk is relatively low. If a product's not energy efficient, that's not going to cause significant problems potentially in the marketplace. But when it's a high risk area, then we have all of these various tools in the quality infrastructure to provide layers of trust. Each of those layers involves resources. And so I think as a community, we have to think very carefully about when different tools are brought to bear. As Christian said, accreditation is the highest level. And in many cases, the infrastructure with conformity assessment standards and the industry are able to meet the needs of stakeholders without necessarily engaging through all of the pillars, including accreditation. I know in the US, if we look at the quality infrastructure index that Christian presented, there's really valuable information there. But in our economy, we, as the accreditation community, in the quality infrastructure areas we define it, represent less than 10% of the accreditation activity in the country. And so those other solutions are part of the mix when we determine how are we going to develop the quality infrastructure in a way that's going to be globally compatible. And it is going to need to be a risk-based decision.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias, Warren. Y quizás
Thank you
voy
very
a
much,
hacer esta
Warren, and
pregunta
perhaps
también
I will also pose
para
the next
usted,
question for you,
para que pueda
so you
complementar cómo
may
puede la
add more.
infraestructura de la
How can
calidad
quality
a través
infrastructure
justamente el que
through
mencionaba,
precisely
acreditación,
what you mentioned,
calibración y
accreditation,
certificación,
calibration,
fortalecer la
certification,
implementación
strengthen
de la
the
economía circular
implementation of
en
circular
sectores, por
economy in
ejemplo,
sectors
pesquero,
such as
acuícola, mequinos e
fishery,
industrial? Esta es una
SMEs,
pregunta que nos la hacen
industrial. So
desde
this is a
Piura, Perú,
question
entonces
from
para que
Peru.
más o menos lo asocie
So
con
more or
esta
less
parte
to
de la
relate
región.
it to this part of the region, your answer.
Sure. And I'll start by saying I'm not an expert in most of that. And so I don't want to get into too much detail. But I do think one of the most important aspects of having discussions like this and in looking at quality infrastructure collectively is ensuring that we provide the appropriate information about the value of these institutions and the benefit that comes from solid measurement through competent conformity assessment bodies, using international standards, and providing accreditation to give trust in the data that decision makers use. Now, when we get into the details of fisheries or aquaculture, perhaps Christian's more knowledgeable about the challenges associated with those approaches. But when we look at micro and small enterprises, I think we do, in the quality infrastructure, have to recognize that there are some elements of what we do that cannot be changed based on the size of the entity or the impact of the particular market. But there are things that can be done to ensure that all players in a market have equal access and reasonable connections and information to compete effectively. I think to get into more detail on the question, it's a fantastic question. I would direct the person to perhaps the quality infrastructure institutions there in Peru. I know there are many highly skilled individuals there that could help answer those questions.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very
Sí,
much.
siempre todos los
Yes.
miembros de la
All
cooperación están
members of the
abiertos a cualquier
cooperation are
consulta. Si
open
ustedes
to any
ingresan
question.
a
If
la
you
página
go
web de la
into the
cooperación de
website of
IAAC, ustedes podrán
IAAC,
revisar el listado
you
de
can
miembros,
check the
tenerlos
list
aquí al
of
corriente
full
y allí
members,
tienen información de
and
contacto por
you
si
will
quieren
have their
hacer una
contact
consulta
information
más
if you would like
específica.
to have a more
Y pasemos
one-to-one
con
conversation
una
or
pregunta
questioning.
también
And then we have a
para
question
Earl, por
for
favor.
Earl.
Si todavía está con
Earl, are
nosotros,
you
nos
still
acompaña.
here with us?
¿Me confirma?
Please. Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Ok, muchas gracias.
Thank you very
¿Existe
much.
alguna
So is
relación
there
entre
any
los
relationship
procesos de
between the
certificación internacional y la
international
actual
certification
tendencia
processes and the
europea
current
hacia la
European
reducción de la
trend
energía
towards
nuclear?
the reduction of nuclear energy?
Very, very good question. I do not know of any direct relationship. I would say that the international certification process, I believe, is a strength. For instance, there was recently a standard developed by the ISO community called ISO 19443, and it's basically a standard on nuclear supply chain. It takes the ISO 9001 standard and introduces some nuclear unique clauses and requirements. The U.S. community in that regard is playing catch up. We a lot of our suppliers in Europe are using this standard to certify their products, and now more so in the U.S. I'm seeing that happen more often. So I think the international standardization or certification process will improve things. I can't really draw a connection between that and the reduction of nuclear power plants in Europe, but I do think you will see a turnaround with the introduction of more power plants in Europe. I know that France is full throttle. The UK is introducing new power plants. And I just think the trend will reverse. Thank you.
Muchas gracias
Thank
también.
you very much.
Vamos a finalizar con esta
And we will wrap
pregunta
up with
para
this
Warren, por
question
favor.
for Warren, please.
Indican, me gustaría saber
Well, I
cómo
would
va a
like to
afectar
know
la
how
inteligencia artificial en los procesos
artificial
si se piensa
intelligence will
integrar o
affect
regularlo.
the processes if we are trying to regulate them, incorporate them. What do you think?
Well, I think it's potentially it's all of the above. I think there is going to be there are going to be tremendous impacts across the quality infrastructure. And if you think about historically the strength of the quality infrastructure, looking at metrology providing the basis for measurement and evaluation. And I think that's going to be important in artificial intelligence, even if it's not measurements necessarily based in the international system, but measurements based on data that are characterized and evaluated as providing reliable a reliable starting point for that evaluation. In the conformity assessment space, I think we're just beginning to fully appreciate the impacts. But across the quality infrastructure, there's a lot of discussion around this. And ensuring that when we talk about the impacts, that we're speaking a common language and distinguishing between automation tools or other technologies versus the true impact of a different technology that we have not considered in the broader context. And I think the last thing that I'll say is when we think about the outcomes and the trust that we provide through the quality infrastructure, this is a new area where there's a inherent, perhaps, mistrust that we never really had before. When we're basing our outcomes on measurements, physical measurements, chemical measurements, and so on, there's a connection to standards, measurement standards that people may not fully understand, but I think inherently appreciate. With artificial intelligence, there are tremendous opportunities that may be held back because we don't have the same level of trust. I think we have a lot of work to do. I think that would be the topic of more than one webinar in the future. But I think we're already realizing these impacts, and we need to be aware, both as those of us in the webinar today that represent conformity assessment, accreditation, metrology standards, that we're aware of the needs and are even more responsive to the end providers of the end users of our results, the nuclear regulatory commissions of the world, the regulators, and most importantly, the consumers and citizens that trust this infrastructure to keep them safe and to provide security in their day-to-day lives.
Can I also add something to what Warren said? Veronica?
Adelante, por favor.
Yes,
Okay,
go
thank
ahead.
you. So Warren correctly mentioned AI for quality infrastructure. Will quality infrastructure processes made more efficient, more productive, easier, and also detecting possibly new ways of doing things in QI. But we also need to look at quality infrastructure for AI. Quality infrastructure will also help to develop standards for artificial intelligence, for regulating artificial intelligence, something which is also coming up now, for example, in the European Union and also in other countries, but also for other aspects, like, for example, creating transparency and working on cybersecurity, on governance of AI and so forth. So quality infrastructure is a very important tool to deal with AI, to manage AI. There are also ISO standards already coming up for AI management or for AI risk management. something where QI can play a very important role in the future to make AI useful and manageable and um, useful, basically less dangerous in the context of the economy, the society, environment, and so forth. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por las
Thank you very
respuestas de
much for
nuestros
your
expositores y
answers. Thank you,
agradecemos también a
speakers. And
todos
we're
los
also grateful
participantes que han
for
estado
the
prestando atención, que han
participants who have
estado
been paying
activamente
attention, who have
con sus consultas y buenos
actively engaged
comentarios
with good comments and good
en nuestro
questions
espacio de preguntas y
in our
respuestas.
Q&A.
Siempre ustedes son el motivo de que
You
nosotros
are the
hagamos estos
reason
eventos, así
why
que
we
los
have these
comentarios siempre
events.
son
So these
bienvenidos.
comments are more than welcome.
Continuamos.
Shall we continue then?
Nos acercamos al cierre de
We're
este
reaching
seminario web
the
de
end of
IAAC.
this
Hoy hemos
webinar.
confirmado que la
We've
infraestructura de la
confirmed that
calidad tiene un
quality
papel
infrastructure
fundamental
plays
para
an essential
transformar los
role
grandes
to
objetivos de
transform the
sostenibilidad
large
en
sustainability
resultados
objectives
verificables,
in
confiables y
verifiable,
útiles para la
reliable, and
sociedad.
useful results for
Agradecemos
society.
también al
We're
Comité de
very
Partes
grateful to
Interesadas
the
de IAAC,
stakeholders
a sus
committee from
grupos de
IAAC,
trabajo,
to their
al
working
equipo
groups,
técnico
to
y
the
por
technical
supuesto
team,
a
and
todas las
certainly
personas
to
conectadas desde
everyone who
distintos
is
países.
connected
Su
from
participación
around the world.
claramente es
Thank you. Your
fundamental para este
participation is
intercambio.
essential and fundamental for
Y
this
bueno, y para las
exchange.
palabras
And for the
finales,
final
pedimos a
words,
Warren
we
Merkel que
ask
nos
Warren
acompañe,
Merkel
esta vez como
to join us as
vicepresidente
vice
de
chair this
IAAC, de la
time of
cooperación,
IAC of the
a nombre también
cooperation on
de
behalf
Andrea
also
Melo,
of
la
Andrea
presidenta,
Melo,
que
the
ya no nos
chair,
puede
who
acompañar en
wasn't
este momento,
able to
pero le
continue to
pedimos
participate. Thus,
que nos dé unas
we
palabras de cierre
invite Warren to
y
share
que nos
some
comparta
closing
las
remarks and to
reflexiones finales de
share
toda esta
final
jornada.
thoughts
Adelante, por
of
favor.
these sessions. You have the floor, Warren.
Thank you very much. I think people are probably not wanting to hear my voice much more, but I do really want to echo the thanks of the participants. I am always so impressed with the number of participants we get, the quality of the responses and questions, and the true interest in advancing quality infrastructure in our region. I also want to emphasize the thanks of the stakeholder committee. As you can see through the nature of the discussion today, stakeholders are so important to ensuring that the quality infrastructure is not only continuing to be relevant, but able to deliver the outcomes that we need. Within IAAC, we are proud to provide this venue for that kind of exchange and welcome your ongoing input to our organization in particular and our quality infrastructure partners in America. Thank you all very much, and thank you to the team for organizing this webinar.
Muchísimas gracias y con esto
Thank you
damos
very much. And with
concluido el
that,
evento.
we
Siempre
finish the
recuerden
event. Always remember
ingresar al QR que está en
to
sus pantallas para
log
poder
into the
dejarnos sus
QR to
comentarios
leave
y
your
quizás
comments,
nuevas
feedback,
ideas
and perhaps new
temáticas
insights,
para
ideas,
futuros
themes
eventos.
for
Gracias a
future
todas y
events.
todos
Thank
por su
you to each and
participación.
every one of you
Les
for your
invitamos
participation.
siempre a estar
And we
atentos
always
a las
invite
redes
you
sociales de la
to look at and
cooperación para
visit
que
our
puedan
social
enterarse
media platforms to be
otros
informed
eventos que
of
tenemos
other
planificados
events
para
that
este
we
año.
have planned for the
El
rest of the
evento
year.
que se termina hoy
This
se ha
event
grabado y
has
va a
been
estar
recorded and
disponible
will be
en YouTube,
available in
en el canal
YouTube
de
in
IAC
the
para que lo puedan ver
IAC
quien no pudo
channel,
asistir.
so you can
Y
watch it
bueno, con
again.
esto
And with
siempre
that,
decirles que
I wish to
continuamos
share that we
promoviendo
will
una
continue to
infraestructura de calidad
promote
robusta,
a robust quality
colaborativa y
infrastructure
orientada a
with
generar
collaboration
confianza e
and
impacto
to
real.
generate
Y es
true impact and
precisamente en estos
reliability.
espacios
And
en donde se
that's
los
why we have
demuestra.
these spaces.
Tengan una
May you
excelente
have
jornada.
an
Muchas
excellent rest of
gracias y
your
hasta una
day,
próxima
and
oportunidad.
until next time.